To touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. But what is the shadow? We know it's the darkness-infested region as far away as one can get from Westeros in the known world, roughly speaking. But that doesn't tell us what it is or how it relates to the story. On top of that, there are good reasons to believe that the Shadowlands by Asshai are not our best answer for where Daenerys has to literally go, right? But that may be part of the answer. That's why we have to dedicate an episode to it, because it's a little tricky. This belief, rather this notion, in part stems from knowing that George made some changes along the way. He had a plan, he changed it a bit as he went. The story grew in the telling, as we all know. We're focusing in on that for Daenerys and some related stories. Now, in part, he may have wanted to maintain a layer of mystery about Asshai and the Shadowlands, but even as he steered Dany away from going there directly, he continued to make Asshai and the Shadowlands important, not just to her story, as I said, but to other storylines, and for storylines yet to come, as we'll discuss. The shadow could be a metaphor or symbol for many things. For example, it doesn't have to be a literal place, but as I said, it could be both. We'll take a look at all that and which story elements related to Asshai and the Shadowlands appear in all the books. Not just A Song of Ice and Fire, but The World of Ice and Fire and Blood too. There's a lot to go on with that. There's some new things. This episode is dedicated to these related topics and theories, the potential of what we have, plus a long look at the region that bears the name, because, well, we want to cover all our bases, and Shadowlands sounds really fun. We've covered Asshai before, but not the Shadowlands specifically. So we'll consider Daenerys' arc as it relates to Asshai and the Shadowlands, and Quaithe, who is from the Shadowlands. She's involved heavily this episode, and she's the one who gave Dany this prophecy, after all. And, of course, we only quoted part of it. She continues to appear in Dany's dreams, so that's going to be important. And, of course, the Shadowlands themselves, those who live there are touched by the shadow. Well, what does that mean? They're masked and mysterious. We've got magic. We've got Mirri Maz Duur. We've got Melisandre. We've got Marwyn. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. We usually do our live streams on Monday. This is a special Wednesday live stream. The usual time we do Wednesday live streams is during a TV season. This is not a TV season, as you probably know, but we are live streaming on a special day. It's around the holidays. And normally, though, like I said, 3 o'clock Sundays, or just catch the episodes later on any podcast platform, or just watch the live stream replay on YouTube. It is ad-free if you listen on Patreon, however, as a member. Shout out to our good friend Nina Krusling. That's right, no longer Nina Friel. She is now married. Congratulations to Nina and James. But she's still at goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. That hasn't changed. goodqueenalley with 1l.tumblr.com. And the latest blog post over there is on Daemon and Laena's child. Laena's death and childbirth specifically. The child was malformed, so the question is whether this relates to the problems that some Targaryens have with children and whether that child was such an example. If you have questions for us, ask them live during the stream if you're here for that. Otherwise, hit us up on any of our socials or at westeroshistory@gmail.com. I will, of course, mention some episodes at the end that relate to this one. We do have quite a few ties to other episodes in this one. And we'll start with our trivia question, which will also have its answer at the end of the episode. Which notable character on their way to meet Daenerys is seemingly not mentioned in Quaithe's prophecy? You know, the one Kraken, Dark Flame, and all that one. That business. Lady Sophia Valarian sends a super chat, says, Happy Holidays from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Right on. I didn't know there were Valarians in Virginia, but, you know, the V's flock together. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, thank you, Lady Sophia. And happy holidays to all of you from us. Let's see. First of all, as I often do, I want to give a quick rundown of what you're going to have in this episode. We're going to talk about Dany and Quaithe quite a lot. George's plans for her, the meta of all that. It's not entirely within the text what we know about this. Then, of course, the world-building deep dive on the Shadowlands and the people who live there. That's mostly in the second half. And as we have done an episode on Asshai before, many of you are aware, it was 8 years ago. Not a whole lot has changed since then, but we didn't cover everything. There's things we didn't talk about. For example, we focused on Asshai, and now we're focusing more on the Shadowlands and Daenerys' interpretation of the Shadow as it pertains to her storyline. And of course, there have been some actual changes, though. I said there hadn't been a lot, but there have been some, and some of them, I guess, are fairly significant, which is that, well, Fire and Blood came out. That's pretty big. And since Fire and Blood is included in the mix, we now have one, maybe two characters that have been to Asshai that we didn't know of before. So we'll talk about that. We also have a little bit of influences to discuss. Real-life masking culture will be a brief section in the second half of the episode. A little bit of Robert E. Howard comes up in this one because there's some influence there. And let me read you all the different headers that I've wrote for this episode. That starts with the original plans and the 5-year gap, then the Game of Thrones Asshai recap, Quaithe's prophecy, the A Clash of Kings Asshai recap, Quaithe in Dreams, then the rest of the recaps, which are shorter. A Storm of Swords, A Feast for Crows, A Dance with Dragons, and the World of Ice and Fire / Fire and Blood Asshai recaps. There isn't really one for Dunk and Egg because it's really only mentioned one time just as a throwaway comment, so there's not much to say there. Then we'll talk about the Shadowlands. What is the Shadow? The Shadow Men. Then the IRL masking tradition section. Then we'll talk about some other Song of Ice and Fire threads, a few other characters that are relevant, and the Sea Snake and Alyssa Farman. Let's get to it. The original plans in the 5-year gap is where we're starting. Now, of course, the 5-year gap, to recap, was George's original plan prior to A Feast for Crows. He planned on 5 years passing between A Storm of Swords and the next book, which at the time wasn't even called A Feast for Crows. But of course, he changed his mind. Now, all the main characters were impacted by the scrapping of the 5-year gap, especially the younger POVs, because they weren't given the chance to grow up that was intended as part of the 5-year gap. It's not a big deal for Tyrion or Catelyn, who was already dead, or later POV characters like Theon or Jaime or Davos. It mattered. Well, Theon would argue that 5 extra years in the Dreadfort is actually quite a big deal. Thank you very much. But you get my point. Of course, the younger characters, the younger you get with the characters, the more a big deal it is. Bran was going to be 12, which is kind of funny because he's still, even after 5 years, he would have still been very young. But characters like Dany and Sansa and Jon and Sam, for example, and to a lesser extent Arya, go from teenager to about 20 or maybe 18. So that's a big deal. Like Dany is 16 now as of Dance with Dragons roughly. So she would have been about 21. That's less of a big deal than it would be for some of those older characters, but it's still pretty substantial. And I think it's a bigger deal for her than it is for Jon, because Jon ends the series, or ends the Storm of Swords, rather, as the Lord Commander, and you could pretty easily just say, okay, 5 years of Jon being Lord Commander, not a whole lot happened. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but not as much as it would have been for some other characters. Anyway, for Dany, it would have meant being longer established in Slaver's Bay. So that's not going to happen nearly as much, because there's not going to be that 5 years. And to be honest, the Slaver's Bay probably isn't as narratively important as the Wall. But the big kicker here, yes, Dany isn't as young as a Bran or an Arya, but her dragons are even younger than Bran even. So that 5 years of them not growing is a big deal. And it does relate somewhat to this topic because Asshai is such a place steeped in dragon lore. The Shadowlands perhaps are the place where dragons originated, and thus there's a lot of knowledge associated with dragons and dragon lore out there in the Far East. And, well, younger versus older dragons, well, you can see how that relates at least somewhat, and in other ways that we'll get to. Of course, in the matter of Asshai, it gets tricky. Now, George definitely planned for her to go there at one point, and then changed his mind. But we don't know if he changed his mind because of the 5-year gap or not. However, I'm pretty sure he didn't, which might surprise a lot of you, and it would have surprised me before looking into this episode. Now, there were a host of other changes from George's original conception. There's, of course, the 5-year gap change, but if we go back even farther and look at, say, the original outline, the original plan for the series, which was, of course, just a trilogy at first. Like, for example, Joffrey was going to kill Robb in battle. Catelyn was going to die beyond the Wall instead of in the Riverlands. Jaime was going to become king. He was going to murder his way to the throne, and Tyrion was going to be blamed for a lot of it. So that's different. But here was the original plan for Dany. Quote,
When the moment is right, she will kill her husband to avenge her brother, and then flee with a trusted friend into the wilderness beyond Vaes Dothrak. There, hunted by Dothraki blood riders, illegible, of her life, she stumbles on a cache of dragon's eggs. The birth of a young dragon will give Daenerys the power to bend the Dothraki to her will.
Yeah, there's an actual illegible part in there. That's why I said that, because we don't actually know what that word is. It's probably something in fear of her life, or, you know, they have sworn to kill her, something like that. We understand how blood riders work. The trusted friend that she would be fleeing into the wilderness would be Jorah, probably. That was probably a character he hadn't fully conceived of yet. And of course, no longer is she caring about avenging her brother. So the story we got was quite different, but you can see a lot of those same elements are there. The young dragon giving Daenerys the power to bend the Dothraki to her will. That last sentence really says a lot. That seems to still be happening. That seems to still be close to happening, in fact. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, she is confronted by Khal Joko and 50 of his riders or so, and it seems to be foreshadowed that this will end in Dany becoming the stallion who mounts the world, or being revealed as she already is, I suppose you could say, the stallion who mounts the world, dominating the Dothraki, bringing them as part of her army, a huge part of her army, and going from there. So, was that going to be part of the 5-year gap, though? Was Dany going to go to Asshai during that? Which would enable George to keep some of the mystery, because we don't see it directly, we only see it through her flashbacks, which allows him to be a lot more controlled with what we get. It's not reasonable for her to be there and just things be omitted. But if it's her memory, it's imperfect, it's not happening right in front of us, he can still conceal some things, he can tell the story in a different order. But anyway, that didn't happen, obviously. She never went. But it's something he may have considered. So having it through the eyes of a POV is certainly different than some other outcomes we could have gotten. That said, as we talked about in our Melisandre episode, she might be sort of a mobile Asshai. She knows a lot about the place. She might be the portal to Dany to learn some of those things if they ever meet. Now let's talk about what elements of Asshai, in terms of story from a high level, were introduced in a Game of Thrones, because it's a lot. This is probably the most about Asshai that we get in terms of big, grand things happen right here in this first book. It's pretty wild, because I think it's related to how Dany was going to be going there, and so he wanted to set it up even more. But like I said, even after he turned from having her go directly there, he still wanted to add a lot of detail about it and keep it important. So here we go. Illyrio tells Dany her eggs are from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. Now, we have a lot of reason to believe this is a lie, but the fact that he is referring to a place that dragons really did come from. He's saying, oh, it's like saying this sparkling wine is actually champagne when it's not from the Champagne region. It's the same thing. It's still sparkling wine, but he's exaggerating about how exotic they are. Because she does hear dragons originated there, so it's a lie that is easy to sell because it could be true. We hear about ghost grass. When Dany is on the Dothraki Sea, basically for the first time, she has a conversation with Ser Jorah about it, and they talk about all the different colors it can be, and then the subject of ghost grass comes up, and it's pretty chilling, and Dany doesn't really want to talk about it because she's like, oh, I'm having a good day, the grass looks nice, let's not talk about that death grass or whatever. But it's clearly something that is relevant, right? And she's heard about all the magic openly practiced there. We get a longer version of this in the World of Ice and Fire book, but she thinks during a Game of Thrones about spell singers, warlocks, aeromancers that practice openly, and then shadowbinders and blood mages practice at night. Like they have to keep some of their magic hidden, even in a place like Asshai. That may not even be true, but that's what she's heard, and it's part of the pastiche of knowledge that is out there about Asshai, part of what people believe about it. She sees shadow men and caravans from Asshai at Vaes Dothrak, and sees some hideous god statues that Jorah says are probably from the Shadowlands. Like, something about misshapen gods, just instantly, misshapen gods must be the Shadowlands. Like, okay, I guess that is a thing, but why? Well, I don't know. Mirri Maz Duur learned her necromancy there, the thing that she did to bring Drogo back, quote unquote, to save his quote unquote life, right? She definitely did something. There were all those shadows and the dead horse, and there was magic for sure. So she learned it in Asshai, and also met Marwyn there, where she learned other things about healing from a maester. And then after Drogo's death, Jorah suggests they go to Asshai. Then again, when she builds Drogo's pyre, he again suggests, let's just go east. He's not thinking Asshai only. He's throwing a bunch of ideas out there, just anything to get her from the path she's on, which even he doesn't realize at the time is her jumping into the pyre. But still, doesn't like her plan, whatever it is. He says, Ye-Ti, Qarth, the Jade Sea, Asshai-by-the-Shadow. Let's go one of those places. Even Tywin mentions that Stannis is bringing a Shadowbinder from Asshai in the first book. He doesn't mention her by name. We haven't heard the name Melisandre yet, but already it's there. And then, of course, Bran's dream. Dragons stirring under the sunrise. Here we go. Quote.
He lifted his eyes and saw clear across the narrow sea, to the free cities and the green Dothraki sea, and beyond, to Vaes Dothrak under its mountain, to the fabled lands of the Jade Sea, to Asshai-by-the-Shadow, where dragons stirred beneath the sunrise.
So you can see there's a lot of setup for Asshai in the first book. Quite a few things there. The Bran bit in particular is interesting to me because we later learn that Dany's dragons are the only ones. Even Quaithe says that. So what is Bran seeing dragons stirring beneath the sunrise for? Is this just a kind of the vagaries of dreams? That said, everything else in Bran's dream, in this particular dream, maybe not some of the others, but this one, we can pretty much pinpoint. It's all fairly clear which characters are being referred to. You get the giant with black blood. That's clearly Gregor. He's overshadowing Jaime and Sandor. You've got Jon turning cold and things like that. It all seems kind of straightforward in terms of what we've seen already. But this part never really came to pass and doesn't seem like it will. So this might be metaphorical. It might be just something that I'm looking too deeply at that is meant to be as deep as I'm thinking about it. But it could be that George changed his mind. He intended for there to be some dragons in Asshai, but changed his mind to make it the only ones. But that doesn't seem very likely, because by the end of the book, the last line is the sound of dragons was heard for the first time, and I don't remember the exact. I didn't pull that quote exactly, but you know what I mean. It said it's been first time it's been heard in forever. So that also seems to argue against dragons having been currently in Asshai, although maybe more will hatch because of these ones. Who knows? It's definitely a bit of a quirk to this whole angle we're looking at here. Now, Quaithe's prophecy, however, is not in a Game of Thrones, so that's really important. Very important going forward. Keep that in mind. And Dany has already sailed west before sailing east, right? Think about this. If you fast forward to A Clash of Kings, it's the news of Robert Baratheon's death at the end of A Clash of Kings that gets her to turn west. So she's not going to. Is she going to go back to Asshai? That couldn't have been the original plan for George. That doesn't make sense for her to go to Qarth, then go all the way back and to Slaver's Bay, which is to the west, and then go east again to Asshai. Qarth is as close as she's ever going to get, I think. That's as far east as she's ever going to go. But it's interesting that George had decided at the beginning of A Clash of Kings, he surely knew what was going to happen with Dany, that she was already going to decide by the end of the book to go west. Even though she doesn't get all the way west, she gets stuck in Slaver's Bay, she's definitely not heading in the direction of Asshai, and she tells Quaithe, as we'll see in a minute, she doesn't have the intention of going there. As soon as A Clash of Kings, early A Clash of Kings, she's already pretty much decided not to go. I think that's a surprise to a lot of y'all. I think a lot of y'all, again, self-included, before this episode, thought it was going to be the 5-year gap was around the time those plans got scrapped. Let's continue with Quaithe's prophecy. Quote.
The woman stepped closer and lay 2 fingers on Dany's wrist. You are the mother of dragons, are you not?
She is, and no spawn of shadows may touch her.
Jogo brushed Quaithe's fingers away with the handle of his whip. The woman took a step backward. You must leave the city soon, Daenerys Targaryen, or you will never be permitted to leave it at all. Dany's wrist still tingled where Quaithe had touched her. Where would you have me go? She asked. To go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Asshai, Dany thought. She would have me go to Asshai. Will the Asshai give me an army? She demanded. Will there be gold for me in Asshai? Will there be ships? What is there in Asshai that I will not find in Qarth? Truth, said the woman in the mask, and bowing, she faded back into the crowd. Ricardo snorted contempt through his drooping black mustachios.
Khaleesi, better a man should swallow scorpions than trust in the spawn of shadows, who dare not show their face beneath the sun. It is known.
It is known, Aggo agreed.
So Dany thinks Quaithe means go to Asshai. She says, you want me to go to Asshai? And Quaithe says, you'll find truth there. So it seems pretty confirmed that that's what Quaithe meant. There's no well, what does she mean by go beneath the shadow? Well, she straight up says Asshai, or at least responds in the affirmative when Dany says, you mean Asshai. So in this case, it looks kind of straightforward. However, as I just said, this is the book where Dany goes west, not east. She doesn't go towards Asshai. So what does that mean? Quaithe isn't getting Dany to go the direction she wants, but later Quaithe is going to keep saying these things. She's going to repeat this prophecy in a dream or glass candle. We'll get to that. And doesn't seem to be like, hey, you're going the wrong way. She just repeats the prophecy and says a few other things with it. So it's a little puzzling, not in a something's wrong here way, not in a this is suspicious for Quaithe way, because I do think at the end of it, Quaithe appears to be the only one of the three that meets her in Qarth that actually has some goodwill intended. Maybe not goodwill towards Dany. Maybe that goodwill is towards, saving the world, preventing another long night. But Quaithe doesn't have a personal goal. Well, so she's not trying to benefit from this. It's not greed or ambition that's driving Quaithe's messages to Dany. Even if the messages aren't 100% clear, I think we can tell that. She gives her warnings and communicates with her, tries to steer her in the right direction, but she's also going to continue to tell her what she is and what to do. I suppose we should consider the possibility that George was of two minds in the beginning of this book and changed his mind by the end of it. That is possible, and that he didn't tweak some of this earlier writing to reflect that. But I don't really look at it that way. That's a rabbit hole that's too difficult to decipher. If he just made some mistake, well, who knows? So I don't really want to look at it that way because, even though it's possible, it kind of leads us to a dead end. There's not much we can say about that. And anyway, I don't believe that too, because it all seems to add up even if there's a lot of mystery in here. So the truths are likely related to this other point that Quaithe is pushing. Remember that you are a dragon. Remember what you are. Now that's the thing that's going to come up in these other ones that isn't here in this one. And I think it's related to truth. Like, Dany, you are a dragon. You have to be a dragon. And as we've seen in a number of places throughout the series, what that means is you have to destroy. You have to unleash that fire. The proverbial fire in A Song of Ice and Fire, perhaps. Now, of course, the other parts of the prophecy, let's talk about that. To go north, you must go south. Okay, well, I think we understand that. To go north, the ultimate destination of north, the wall / the others, that's potentially where her ultimate destiny is. West is presumably Westeros, right? You have to go west, you must go east. Well, she did go east, not as far as Asshai, but Qarth is, well, that's farther than anyone else among the POVs has gone during the time of the series. Technically, Melisandre was there, before the series. But anyway, you get my point. That's really far.
I have an alternative for you.
Okay.
To go north, she has to go south. She has to go down on someone. There, gotcha.
This is the X-rated version of this is a song of ice and fire and sex. No.
That's just the book already, Aziz.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. It's Anyway, so Asshai is both south and east. It's kind of the extreme in both of those directions. So it's the thing that she has to do first on both of these. To go north, you have to go south. To go west, you have to go east. Well, Asshai is the farthest south and almost the farthest east. Or the farthest of both those things. It's really like a city or anything. Obviously, there's the continent of Ulthos, but the continent of Ulthos has never even been mentioned in A Song of Ice and Fire and doesn't seem to have any cities or anything. So to go forward, you must go back. What about that? That one, a straightforward interpretation is, you have to look back at the past. You have to examine the past to learn maybe this truth that Quaithe is referring to, the truth about dragon lords, the truth about the nature of dragons, the truth about the nature of Valyria and Targaryens. What's the deal there? Is there literal dragon blood in her? Is that part of the secret? Is that the secret? But this kind of conflicts with another thing that Dany keeps saying to herself, also in book 1. If I look back, I am lost. Okay, well, to go forward, you must go back. All right, well, you can't look back. You can go back, but you can't look back. So what does that mean? One great idea that comes from Nina, I think this theory's been out there, but she's one of the first people that I heard it from, if not the first, is that, well, she's going to go back to the Mother of Mountains. That's a place she's been to. She's got to go back there. It's really important. It's been foreshadowed. It's been prophesied in at least one of her dreams, where there's crones emerging from the lake, dripping and kneeling before her. Well, that clearly hasn't happened yet, but you can see how it might. If she goes back to Vaes Dothrak and Drogon burns a bunch of calls or a bunch of sufficient Dothraki to make them kneel to her, to say, "Ooh, look at that's the ultimate stallion right there. We've got horses, but she's riding that." You can see why that would be superior, even though they might have trouble accepting a woman. Burn enough men, and eventually they'll fall in line, I suppose. So that's a very strong possibility for the go back part. Now, it could be multiples. George loves multiple meanings. It can absolutely be both. It can be going back to the Dothraki Sea, the Mother of Mountains, to win the Dothraki over, to dominate them, to bring them as part of her army, the main part of her army. And it can also mean looking back in time into her ancestry and to the origin of her, people, her culture, all that. And into the prophecies that are related to her. The past is where Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa and the First Long Night happened. If she needs to learn about those things, that would make sense if she does, because she's such a crucial part of the ultimate high magic aspect of this story. The big prophecy, the others, the Song of Ice and Fire. Dany is as wrapped up in that as anyone. Maybe the most. She might be the character that's the most wrapped up in it. Now, what about to touch the light? Is that the light at the other side of the ultimate darkness? Is that the light at the end of the tunnel, proverbially, on the other side of the long night? Does it mean save humanity? Is it the ultimate destiny of hers to be this hero? Or is it her own death? Again, this is a chance for both. Touching the light as in achieving, going to heaven, the equivalent of that by being a heroic figure, by her living a heroic life, dying for a great cause. What better cause is there than to save the world? So, yeah, there's nothing in this prophecy that promises her survival, but it does. And Quaithe can be ambitious about saving the world without caring much about what happens to Daenerys. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, your life is not important in the scheme of things, Daenerys. Yes, this isn't about saving my own life or my own personal goals, but that doesn't mean you come out of this alive. Queen Dany, mother of dragons. So pass beneath the shadow to touch the light, right? To touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. What does that mean? To get to heaven, you must go through hell? That's a way to think about it. Again, the shadow of the Mother of Mountains. This is where she wins the Dothraki. That could be, in order to touch the light, in order to defeat the darkness, she needs to return to these things, to claim this army, to do kind of dark things to win them. Burning a bunch of them, it's not the most upright thing that for a hero to do, but it's all in service of a very heroic thing, apparently. But even at this early point of Quaithe, even here, even in this quote we just read that we've been analyzing here for a few minutes, Dany's already saying, I don't want to go to Asshai. I don't believe that there's a good reason to go here. Why doesn't Quaithe be more direct. Why doesn't she say something about what this truth is? I suppose because Dany wouldn't believe her. She's like, you got to find these truths for yourself. You need to learn them on your own, or you'll just think I'm making this up. But also, it appears George had already decided by this point that he wasn't going to have Dany go to Asshai. So Quaithe is pushing for it. Dany's pushing back. Asshai remains important, but it remains mysterious by her not going there. So I think that's where the equilibrium George settled on here. But it's interesting that he had already decided that before introducing Quaithe, the person that says you have to go there. Yeah. And it's relevant, too, that she calls herself Quaithe of the Shadow. She's not Quaithe of Asshai. Melisandre says Melisandre of Asshai, and even Melisandre isn't from there. Actually, maybe nobody is from there, given there's no children there. So only transplants live in Asshai, so that kind of makes sense. But it's interesting that Quaithe's origin is in the Shadowlands, apparently. I mean, maybe she's just calling herself that. But that would fit. But another quirk about Quaithe here that I want to throw out here while we're talking about her. She's not from Qarth, right? She's from the Shadow. She wears the mask. She seems genuinely from there. I mean, maybe that's part of this whole disguise or way of just manipulating Dany, even if she's manipulating her to a good cause. Why was she in Qarth in the first place? Did she know Dany would be there? Did she prophesy that meeting that the Mother of Dragons would go to Qarth? Yeah, how did she know that? That's interesting. And this delegation was her and Xaro Xhoan Daxos and Pyat Pree. Xaro is extremely wealthy and powerful. Pyat Pree is not maybe wealthy, but powerful. The Warlocks have their cultural place in Qarth. Their power is on the wane, but it's still recognized, and a lot of people still fear them. So it's kind of an odd pairing of those two with her. You can see why Xaro and Pyat are there, but what is this Qarthine prophet doing there? You know, I mean, this prophet from the Shadowlands doing there. It seems she's the one that's a little out of place there, and that's not in a way that seems like a mistake or something. But I never really thought about it in that light before, at least not in this light, in the shadow. Haha. So yeah, I do wonder about it. My best guess is she foresaw it and knew that's where she could meet Dany, and would be the one place to meet her in person, because that's the only time they meet is in Qarth. Those 2 times or 3 times in Qarth, and then from then on it's dream/glass candle. Well, we'll get to that. So there's that touch of the hand on her wrist where it tingles, and it tingles later. I don't know what this means, but my guess is this is how she's able to contact her with the glass candle, like it's like a homing device, the equivalent of like, okay, I've denoted you, I've tagged you, now I can speak to you later through dreams. Maybe it requires that initial contact, some sort of like micro spell. I don't know. I don't know what term to use for this, but it can't mean nothing that Dany felt the tingling after Quaithe touched her there. I can't imagine that's just completely nothing, just a complete red herring, especially given the dreams and stuff later. And of course, this is where she says there's no dragons until yours are the first born again into this world. So it seems to confirm that Bran's dream was not of real dragons, or is something of the future or the past. Unless it's an artifact of a decision George changed his mind on. So it's after discussing Asshai with Quaithe and then Jorah. So she comes in and encourages her again to go to Asshai. And Jorah's like, at first, remember Jorah was telling her go there, but not because he thought there's truth for her or there's knowledge for her there. He just wanted to get as far away from Westeros as possible, probably so he could have her all to himself, but also because he wanted her as far away from her enemies as possible, which is somewhat reasonable. But what it actually leads her to in this case is, well, okay, maybe not Asshai. I'm still against going there. Guess I'm going to have to do the House of the Undying. In retrospect, it's not the best decision she ever made, but it was certainly important and valuable, even though it was very dangerous and almost got her killed. It's the exact sort of thing Quaithe warned her about, too. This is the other thing about those 3 that makes Quaithe a little odd, is that Xaro is ambitious for Dany. He wants to marry her to take one of her dragons, if not all of them. And then we know from the House of the Undying, they were trying to like drain her life force, take her dragon. It's not exactly clear, but they intended no good for Dany and Drogon, I suppose. Now, what happened? It was a micro version of what we're talking about. They tried to steal her power, for lack of a better word. And what did she do about it? She burned it. Drogon did, really. She didn't. Drogon did it. But he showed her the way. He was a dragon. He doesn't have any other mode. He burned the threat. He's like, these guys are coming. They're bad news for my mother. I burn them. Simple, right? There's no need to overthink it. Burn them. So I think this is part of Dany's education. It wasn't what Quaithe intended, but it gave her an example of exactly what... It gave Dany an example of exactly what Quaithe was talking about. People are going to want to steal your dragons. They're going to want to manipulate you into doing things with your dragons that benefit them. They're going to put the guise of, well, this is where Quaithe is overlapping perhaps with her own warning, which is she says people are going to say it's for good. They're going to say it's for justice. They're going to say, you know, all these things that will try to get Dany to think, hey, this is a good cause. I'll lend my support to this. Like perhaps getting embroiled in Slaver's Bay, for example. But basically she's saying, avoid all these embroilments and avoid all these people who are trying to use you. Like Zaro, like Pyat Pri. She's standing right next to them saying, psst, like these two guys, beware. I've got your best interests at heart. No, really, I do. And let me prove that. These two guys don't. And they pretty quickly prove that she was right about that. And Dany never actually like seems to comprehend this. She never says, that's pretty much exactly what Quaithe said. Maybe it's just such common sense that, yes, of course, people are going to try to use my power and manipulate me. I'm the mother of dragons. I'm this powerful figure. Of course, people are going to try to do that to me. Quaithe didn't really tell me anything I didn't know already. Still, it reinforces the idea that Quaithe's overall vibe is world saving and not, I have an ulterior motive here. But again, don't mistake that for empathy towards Dany as an individual. If world saving is on her list here, Dany's life probably isn't particularly important. So as I said about Melisandre, that she is a walking part of Asshai. She is the elements of Asshai that Dany won't go to. They'll maybe come to her. It also enables, again, George to keep Asshai more mysterious by having flashbacks or just filtered information through Melisandre. Quaithe can still be part of that too. Quaithe probably won't appear in person in Westeros, though she might, and why not? Hey, Quaithe, if you're serious about saving the world, you should show up also. Put your money where your mouth is, or your mask is. And but either way, through her, we might learn a little more about Asshai, and maybe she'll say some other things besides this prophecy. So I do think that just from the A Clash of Kings, A Game of Thrones elements here, we get two things. To save the world, you must be a dragon. Dragon, save the world. And that just means, yeah, it's a little counterintuitive. You got to destroy a lot of things to save the world. But that's a tough lesson to learn. It's a tough truth to accept. And that's part of why maybe Quaithe is a little cagey about it. Okay, so the Clash of Kings Asshai recap, if we go through a lot of what we said, it's a shorter list than a Game of Thrones. These lists are going to get shorter as we go through them because, well, you don't have to reintroduce things that have already been introduced. And, yeah, a lot was introduced in the first book. So here we go. Melisandre, the Azor Ahai prophecy. So that's really important because we heard technically there was a Shadowbinder from Asshai, like I said, but we didn't have a name, we didn't have an identity, we didn't have any backstory, and we didn't have any of the Azor Ahai prophecy. That is all A Clash of Kings. The whole Nissa, Azor Ahai, forging the sword, all that business, that comes in book 2. And the Comet is part of bringing that on because of remember, the beginning of that prophecy is when the red star bleeds. Yeah. Also, the Strangler comes up in this book. A Clash of Kings, that's the Strangler is a poison from Asshai. So dark purple that it appears black. Appropriately shadowy, like the Shadowlands, right? Incidentally, I decided on a plain all black shirt today in honor of the Shadow. It's like Shay and I couldn't think of a time when I didn't wear some sort of Game of Thrones shirt for an episode.
Yeah, I feel like there might have been a time you did a plain green shirt for the Greens, but maybe that was Sean. One time, one of you guys did do a plain shirt, though.
That's our own personal lore there, shirt lore. So Dany is wondering, or rather, me backing up a little bit. And then again at the end of the book, Sansa gets her purple necklace that, of course, doesn't really come into play until the next book when it's used to murder Joffrey. But technically, it is given to her at the end of A Clash of Kings. Quaithe's prophecy, of course, like I said, also comes in this book. We talked about that a lot already, so it's important to denote that both the Azor Ahai prophecy and Quaithe's prophecy both come in A Clash of Kings, both pretty early in the book, too. So yeah, Dany's wondering how to train her dragons, and you could see why that might relate to Asshai. She wants to learn about dragon lore, and since there's no Valyria to learn those things from, well, maybe the place that had dragons before that, even though it's been so long, well, Asshai is still there. And even if she's not going to go there, it doesn't mean she can't acquire some of that knowledge through other means, through other people who maybe already learned that knowledge. Quite possibly the House of the Undying, which we think is related to Asshai for some parts of it, because just some of the things she learns there are related to what she might have learned in Asshai had she gone there, right? That's maybe some of the meta, is that a scene like House of the Undying might have happened in Asshai if she had actually gone there. Right, instead of it happening in Qarth, which is kind of a random place for that to happen, George had to kind of invent the warlocks and all that, which was a reasonable thing to do. It worked, but it doesn't seem like that was part of the original plan. He's like, rather than go all the way to Asshai, we'll go most of the way and do this other stuff instead. So, and again, Jorah stops suggesting Asshai. He just thinks about not staying in one place. He's more concerned with not setting down roots anywhere where the usurper and his knives can find out where they are. Of course, they also find out the usurper is quite dead, but that's the last chapter in the book for her. Now, Xaro, again, actually, though he's one of the ones Quaithe warned about, or the type that he warned about, or she warned about, is also against, quote, such truce the Asshai horde are not like to make you smile. Well, that's not an argument against it, Xaro. She wants to learn truths. Those truths might be painful. It might be difficult, but she needs to learn them. She's not the type to just be sidelined and live in your mansion and be wealthy and sail the Jade Sea, because, as we recall, he did offer specifically that, and she said no. So in the final chapter, she only has 5 chapters in A Clash of Kings. Quite a bit happens in them, even though it's just a lot of it is in Qarth, which feels like a dead end in some ways. She has a lot of change to her perspective and learns a lot of supernatural stuff there. Anyway, she learns also that Robert is dead, and Illyrio's 3 ships show up to bring her west. So it's like explicitly she goes west on these ships that come to pick her up, and she's like, yes. Now, of course, she does do the thing that could have wound up taking her to Asshai. Maybe George's original plan was Illyrio's going to send these ships, and she's going to make them go east. Because what she does instead is make them go to Slaver's Bay. That wasn't part of the plan either. She still diverts the ships and tells them to go somewhere that Illyrio didn't want. It just happens to be a different place that maybe was originally planned. Let's talk about Quaithe in dreams. She continues to appear after Clash of Kings, as I said, and as you probably know. But not in person, of course. Here's Dany 3, A Storm of Swords. Quote,
someone was in the cabin with her. Irri? Cheeky? Where are you? Her handmaids did not respond. It was too black to see, but she could hear them breathing. Jorah, is that you? They sleep, a woman said. They all sleep. The voice was very close. Even dragons must sleep. Oh, she's standing over me. Who's there? Dany peered into the darkness. She thought she could see a shadow, the faintest outline of a shape. What do you want of me? Remember, to go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Quaithe? Dany sprung from the bed and threw open the door. Pale yellow lantern light flooded the cabin. And Irri and Jiki sat up sleepily.
So this is Quaithe's first dream appearance, assuming that's what this is. I do operate on the assumption that this is a dream that she's appearing in via glass candle. That's a whole nother mechanism we'll discuss another day, but we'll operate on that assumption for now, with the perhaps touching her on the wrist thing being how it was all set up. I like how George wrote this, how she can barely see a shadow, the faintest outline, and it's a shadow. Quaithe of the Shadow. That's cool. I like that. Now, this is the same chapter where Dany claims the Unsullied. That's what happens next here. So she wakes up, she's like, Quaithe, and then Quaithe isn't there. She's like, well, that was weird. And then she goes and pulls this awesome move. In a way, she was a dragon in that scene. She turns the Plaza of Punishment into something even more worthy of its name, a hell for the slaver. She burns the hell out of them, literally. It's their ultimate punishment. The Unsullied stand there because, she makes quite sure they understand that ownership is passed from them to her. And, they may have been kind of pleased to see what happened to the old masters there, the Krasnius Monachlas and his ilk. So maybe Quaithe was giving her the little extra motivation boost she needed to pull that off, but maybe not. Maybe Dany was quite set on that plan well ahead of time, and it's because it does kind of seem like Quaithe didn't need to be involved. Like, Dany figured this all out on her own. But it is interesting to note that Dany's kind of acting the way that Quaithe wants her to, in a sense, even though she's not going the direction she wants her to. She's not going to Asshai. This is the final nail in the coffin of going to Asshai, if you want to look at it this way, because I certainly do, and here's why. Asshai is a place with no food. It's a scarce food environment. It is the worst place to bring an army. She just acquires 8,000 Unsullied in this moment, or later in that chapter. You're no longer going to Asshai when you just acquired a large army. Yeah, unless you're separating from the army, which she does actually separate from the army later and goes to the Thraki Sea. Not to Asshai, though. Still, so you can see how this pushes her even farther from Asshai. It doesn't eliminate it entirely, but it's like, okay, you've got a big old army now, and they only kind of follow you. Yeah, they don't have their own captains so much. They're more followers than leaders, etc. That changes a little bit over time, but it's definitely a big point against going to Asshai. So if George wanted her to go there and was still entertaining it, well, it doesn't seem likely. It seems like he changed his mind again before this point, if not well before this point, as we said. And again, doesn't appear to have anything to do with the 5-year gap. Let's look ahead, though, to A Dance with Dragons before jumping back, because I wanted to kind of cover all of Quaithe's appearances at once. Here's Dany 2, A Dance with Dragons.
Hear me, Daenerys Targaryen. The glass candles are burning. Soon comes the pale mare, and after her the others. Kraken and dark flame, lion and griffin, the sun's son and the mummer's dragon. Trust none of them. Remember the undying. Beware the perfumed seneschal. Resnack? Why should I fear him? Dany rose from the pool. Water trickled down her legs, and goose flesh covered her arms in the cool night air. If you have some warning for me, speak plainly. What do you want of me, Quaithe? Moonlight shone in the woman's eyes. To show you the way. I remember the way. I go north to go south, east to go west, back to go forward. And to touch the light, I have to pass beneath the shadow. She squeezed the water from her silvery hair. I am half sick of riddling. In Qarth I was a beggar, but here I am a queen. I command you. Daenerys, remember the undying. Remember who you are. The blood of the dragon. But my dragons are roaring in the darkness.
So I like that. I like a little bit about moonlight in her eyes. That's neat. The moonlight in her eyes. It's a reminder of how Quaithe keeps appearing. Quaithe has starlight in her mask at one point. And now moonlight as well. So it's kind of a recurring little feature of celestial association with her. You can see Dany's annoyance here. She's like, yeah, you've told me I'm tired of your riddles. She was already tired of the riddles before this, but there is a new aspect to it here, of course. This is the add-on. The whole bit about the glass candles burning, the pale mare, the others, Kraken, Dark Flame, Lion, Griffin, etc. All them. That's the new part. That's a big part. But Dany doesn't really want to hear it. It seems like she's not like, let me take notes. Let me write down those names. Let's see, Kraken, Dark Flame. I better, get each of these individualized. And she's maybe a little arrogant about it. She's like, in Quaithe I was a beggar, but here my queen, I command you. Like, who does she think she's commanding? A dream? Like, I don't know about that, Dany. It's not going to work. Like, that's not the attitude or the tactic you should take here, I think. But it is, in a sense, it's sort of the right path because she's telling Dany to take charge and be a dragon. Remember the Undying. Remember who you are. What was the lesson of the Undying? They were bull. They were trying to pull a fast one on her. The lesson is don't trust them. The Undying promised you wealth and knowledge and the secret speech of dragons and all this stuff, and it was just a scam. So Quaithe is reminding her, don't get scammed. Don't believe this stuff, focus on the ultimate goal here. And of course, what happens in A Dance with Dragons, she absolutely gets embroiled in Slaver's Bay. I don't think that Quaithe wanted that. It's hard to tell Dany, a person that she wants to save the world, presuming that's the case, says, hey, don't worry about all the slaves. What do they matter? That's a tough argument against someone who's, you're relying on their generosity, on their they're wanting to save people. You can't say, well, don't save all these people from this horrible death that you can actually see and perceive tangibly. No, leave them alone because the real supernatural magical death is coming. That's the one you got to focus on. Like, how's she supposed to know that? Like, she's never seen the others. She's had a dream here and there. There's been some warnings, but like, this is all very metaphysical, very uncertain to her. And you can see Dany doesn't really treat it very seriously either. She's like, yeah, I know, Quaithe. Why don't you speak more plainly? I'm tired of this. So she's focused on what she can see, what's more tangible to her, which is Slaver's Bay is awful. Slaver's Bay is full of, slavery, and that's about as awful as it gets, especially their version of it. So, be a dragon again. Well, that's how she dealt with the Undying. If Quaithe is saying, don't get embroiled here, maybe what she's saying is, you should, maybe embroiled is the wrong word, because you should be broiling all these people. Do what you did at Astapor. Just burn them all. That's like kind of what the Shave Pate is kind of saying to do. Maybe listen to him, because there's actually bigger and more important things, which is, hard for her to accept, but might be the truth. And again, it could be a warning because the warlocks came seeking revenge, right? We know that Pyat Pree gathered his remaining people together to enact revenge on Dany, but we know that Euron has absconded with them. Does Quaithe know that? Maybe? I think so, because she doesn't say, hey, the warlocks are coming for you. She does say the Kraken is coming for you, and that doesn't mean she knows that Euron has stolen their revenge and that he has the dragon egg and all that stuff. Anyway, that's a whole nother story, but it's related for sure. So I think it's just, you could definitely interpret this scene as Quaithe saying, stay focused on the core mission. And don't forget that you can solve a lot of problems by burning them. It's not the most high-minded solution. And you kind of do wonder why Quaithe doesn't just straight up say that. Like, just burn more things, Maybe because Dany wouldn't listen if Quaithe said things like that. She's like, I'm not going to take advice from this person that just preaches devastation as an answer. It's going to take Dany learning or coming to terms with some things maybe to accept that actually devastation might be the answer to at least some of these problems. But she's young and maybe thinks that there's other ways to do that. Time may prove her wrong, but Quaithe may be also telling her you don't have that much time. Now, there is one more Quaithe appearance, although it's arguably, is this an appearance or is this Dany's imagination? Well, that's part of what we have to think about here. It's out on the Dothraki Sea. Quote.
Off in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound made her feel sad and lonely, but no less hungry. As the moon rose above the grasslands, Dany slipped at last into a restless sleep. She dreamed. All her cares fell away from her, and all her pains as well, and she seemed to float upward into the sky. She was flying once again, spinning, laughing, dancing, as the stars wheeled around her and whispered secrets in her ear. To go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. To touch the light, You must pass beneath the shadow. Quaithe? Dany called. Where are you, Quaithe? Then she saw. Her mask is made of starlight. Remember who you are, Daenerys, the stars whispered in a woman's voice. The dragons know. Do you?
So again, she's in deprivation here. She's not sure. She's hungry. She's kind of reviewing a lot of what's happened to her. Like there's a later scene here where she's thinking about what Jorah said, and she's kind of having like a debate with Starlight Jorah or just Celestial Jorah. She's kind of, and then she also does the same with Viserys. So she's kind of talking to the voices in her mind. Not that she's like going crazy, but she's starving, and she's having conversations with the people that objected to certain things she did. And she's now thinking about why she's where she is, and maybe it's because she didn't listen to that advice. And again, you just see this point is driven home. It's separated by many chapters with other characters and even many books. But Quaithe just keeps saying the same things. She says, the whole north-south, pass beneath the shadow, touch the light stuff, and remember who you are, the dragons, etc. You're a dragon. It just keeps over and over being that. Whether we understand what that means, I'm not 100% sure, but we certainly have pinpointed that there's not a lot of variation here. Quaithe is saying the same things. Now, she added on that bit about Dark Flame and Kraken and all that, but that's just, she ends that with trust none of them. It's a repeat of the same warning she already gave. It's just more specific. She's saying, don't trust anyone. And then in the later warning, she just gives specifics. She says, Kraken, Dark Flame. Those are guys you shouldn't trust. First, she's like, Xaro and Pyat Pri, whisper. Now these other people. Pretty much nobody can she trust. No one is really on that same path of saving the world. That's not a path most people are on, right? They're just out for themselves. That's most of humanity, right? People aren't that willing to die for everything or for everyone. So this is where I think a lot of the narrative purpose for Asshai was shifted into these dreams. It's still there. Quaithe is the representative of Asshai. She's from the shadow. She's got these prophecies, just like other plot lines are driven by some prophecies. You know, there's the Ghost of Highheart. There's people like Aemon, and I'm trying to avoid ones that are specifically related to Dany, but they're even because Aemon actually is related to Dany, but they're like literally related to her. But you know what I mean? There's other prophecies too, and other things that have been predicted that came true. So I think that's, we can see evidence of that here, where we still get the influence of Asshai, but it's through these characters and through the magic of Asshai and the Shadowlands rather than through direct contact. And again, we have this mask of starlight. Remember I pointed that out a minute ago with the moonlight in her eyes. Again, the mask of starlight too. And in the first example, there were stars as well. So Dany's dreams and Quaithe have this recurring sort of setting to them, I guess, or certain details that repeat. Now, to be fair, when Dany also had her fever, when she was after the big moment where she goes into the tent, where Jorah carries her into the tent, she's been hit by a rock, and obviously Mirri Maz Duur is doing the sorcery, and then Rhaego dies. So she has that vision, which is an extensive dream that it's like a vision, then the phrase, don't want to wake the dragon. A vision, then the phrase, want to wake the dragon. Then a vision, then to wake the dragon. Then a vision, wake the dragon. So it's like that word game where you remove a word from the beginning of the sentence and it changes the meaning each time until it coalesces into wake the dragon. And it's her. And because she, in this same vision, it coalesces or climaxes with her back rips open, wings burst forth, she flies, and there's like the shadow of her wings. And yes, it actually uses the phrase shadow.
I can't help but be reminded of the scene in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Where she has wings behind her back, to be clear. Yeah,
that's a very good one to think of because it definitely illustrates what she was probably seeing in her dreams. And yeah, that was a cool moment in the show. So again, those supernatural ancestors, this is that dream. She's having the dream of the ghost with pale swords and silver and platinum hair and gemstone eyes of various colors that very much seem like they might be her distant ancestors. We've talked about that separately. These might be ancestors older than Valyria. they're saying the same thing. They're the ones saying wake the dragon. Also, they're kind of quaithing her here. They're kind of doing the same thing. They're telling her to be a dragon. They're telling her to know who she is. And they're telling her to destroy. They're telling her to burn. And this is the shadow before the light. This is the hell before heaven. This is exactly what Quaithe was saying. But again, nothing says she will be alive to see it herself, that she will be part of this new world that she maybe is helping create for the rest of humanity. Now, here's where I want to return to that, because yes, we've talked about that dream before, the fever dream, especially the ghostly ancestors. But I want to talk about the part that comes just after it, because we have a connection that isn't explicitly Asshai, but I think because those ghosts are associated with ancestry that might date back to ancient Asshai, we should consider it. So here's the end of that dream, right after the gemstone ancestor ghosts part. Quote,
"The door loomed before her, the red door, so close, so close. The hall was a blur around her, the cold receding behind. And now the stone was gone, and she flew across the Dothraki sea, high and higher, the green rippling beneath, and all that lived and breathed fled in terror from the shadow of her wings. She could smell home. She could see it, there, just beyond that door, green fields and great stone houses and arms to keep her warm. There, she threw open the door.
the dragon.
And saw her brother Rhaegar, mounted on a stallion as black as his armor. Fire glimmered red through the narrow eye-slit of his helm.
The last dragon.
Ser Jorah's voice whispered faintly.
The last. The last.
Dany lifted his polished black visor. The face within was her own. After that, for a long time, there was only the pain, the fire within her, and the whisperings of stars.
So there you go. Another example of the whisperings of stars. Again, the celestial setting for her dreamscape. This leads to her feverish in and out sleep, where she asks for a dragon egg to kind of settle her. And eventually she realizes, oh, my son is dead. That's, the red door is at the beginning and the end of this dream. And it seems to be the red door is not her ultimate fate. The red door represents home, but she's not going home. Behind the door was her brother believing he's the last dragon, which is actually her. And, well, we know what happened to Rhaegar as well. Almost everyone in this vision dies. We've got Drogo in this vision. He turns to ash. Viserys, he gets gold poured on him. Rhaego, his heart bursts into flame. The pale ancestor ghosts, they're long dead. And Rhaegar. Now, not her. She's alive. And not Ser Jorah, who's also in the dream. At least he's not dead yet. But he is kind of out of her life, at least for now. So the chapter begins with wings shadowed her fever dreams. That's the first line. So you got wings shadowed again. The shadow of wings is a very constant refrain. And it comes up multiple times in that chapter alone, and let alone elsewhere in other chapters. So there's quite a few references to that. So we have that and the telling of her to be a dragon. And again, be a dragon in service of the world. Destroy to save the world. Doesn't sound right, but we can see it, I think. She seems to come to terms with it. She hasn't acted on it yet, because this coming to terms with it is in her final chapter in A Dance with Dragons. We haven't had another chapter from her yet. So we haven't seen if this seeming acceptance of the decision or of this reality is going to translate into immediate action or what. We don't know yet, but it seems meaningful. It seems like it might be a big turning point. Let's look at it. Here's the quote. She's no longer seeing Quaithe. She's seeing Ser Jorah at this point.
You took Meereen, he told her, yet still you lingered. To be a queen. You are a queen, her bear said, in Westeros. It is such a long way, she complained. I was tired, Jorah. I was weary of war. I wanted to rest, to laugh, to plant trees and see them grow. I am only a young girl. No, you are the blood of the dragon. The whispering was growing fainter, as if Ser Jorah were falling farther behind. Dragons plant no trees. Remember that. Remember who you are, what you were made to be. Remember your words. Fire and blood, Daenerys told the swaying grass.
Yeah, she says fire and blood. It's like she accepts it. She's like, yeah, I know what they are. Again, this is more explicit. This is more specific. It's not just be a dragon. This is dragons plant no trees. This is dragons don't watch things grow. This is, I wanted this. I wanted home, space, time. No. It's the answer to that. You don't have that. You can't have that. That's not your destiny. That's not what this world has given you. You have a duty. And you can see she's rejecting it. She doesn't want that. She says, I wanted to rest. I wanted to laugh, plant trees, see them grow. Quaithe, I guess, kind of maybe perceives this, or did perceive that, and it was part of why she gave her a little dream kick in the butt to be like, remember who you are, remember what you got to do, go east, you got to go west, etc., all that. That's why she says the same things and annoys her with that. But you can see here, it looks like maybe Dany has accepted it. It took her being in a bad state, which maybe was important. She's no longer trying to tell Quaithe what to do. She's not a queen out in the Dothraki Sea, at least not with the same level of authority, even if she has her dragon. But it changed her perspective. Nothing like having no food and thinking you're going to die to change your perspective, right? She's wrestling with her decisions via these ghosts. She's thinking about the mistakes she made or other paths she could have taken and realizing that, well, this is the path that she has to take, that she's got to be Daenerys the destroyer, not Daenerys the mother of dragons. Well, she can be both, but ultimately she has to destroy. It seems that many will have to pass beneath the shadow to see the light, right? It's not just going to be her. She's going to have to lead other people through that hell to perhaps see the light, the heaven on the other side. Not everyone will make it. Returning from a Europe trip, Asshai and I went to Spain. It can be kind of difficult to get back into your routines, with the time lag and just being somewhere else for a while. It just throws you off, I probably don't have to explain the concept, but one way that we deal with that is by using Rise productivity software. It can really help organize your day. It can tell you when to start or when to finish based on the guidelines you give it. And most importantly, it helps you get from getting distracted. That's a big problem for me. I'm not a very focused guy. I'm always like, ooh, shiny thing on the internet. Let me read about this. Even if it's like in the cause of doing work, I read all sorts of things that might relate to this episode that I ultimately decided, that's a little too off the beaten path. But in some cases, I found stuff that did help. Rise is really helpful to me in parsing all that. I'm saying, hey, obviously looking at Facebook isn't going to help me, but if I'm reading scholarly articles and reading different forums or just reading different theories about the shadow or taking time on my own, that helps keep me focused. Rise is like, hey, don't look at Twitter, don't look at Facebook, but I can tell it which websites are okay and it can give me those warnings. And that helps stand in for my own lack of focus. It's like a little extra little part of my brain that does what my own focus can't do. It's like, steps in for me.
It's funny, Aziz, is I use it to do the flip side too.
Oh, yeah.
In that
do tell.
Sometimes I am overly focused and I just don't get up. I don't take a break. And Rise will be like, hey, it's been like 2 hours and you haven't gotten up. Or it'll be like,
good point.
Hey, you've worked over 8 hours today. It'll be like, 12 hours, you should stop. And I'll be like, you're right, Rise. I did work more than I should have today. Let me just
don't get burned out.
Yeah. So, it works for focus in a few ways, really.
And it can really help at the end of the week when it tells you, hey, you worked this much. That can be kind of satisfying. You'd be like, hey, I put in a pretty good week. And it can really help you feel better about what you've accomplished rather than just having it kind of fall into the ether. Like, yeah, I worked a lot this week, but I don't really know what that means. I don't know how. I couldn't tell you how many hours that was. But, well, with Rise, you can. If you use the code Westeros3, you get 25% off all payments within the first 3 months. The link is in the description. We hope you sign up and experience the same sort of productivity boost that it's been helping us with. Also want to remind you all to check out me on Twitch, twitch.tv/History of Westeros. We play Crusader Kings 3 with the Song of Ice and Fire mod. It's extremely detailed, well made. My folks are currently playing House Corbray. We've changed the religion so that we really value ancestor worship. And the game has a little feature where You can occasionally have a child born that is of, like, is the spitting image of their grandmother or grandfather or some even farther back ancestor, and then they acquire qualities of that character. So it is kind of like a little bit of a reborn, like a reincarnation thing on a minor scale, and that's been particularly fun. I'm hoping for a reborn Gwaine Corbray or something like that. That's the guy who was in the Kingsguard that fought Daemon Blackfire. But maybe other things are in the cards for us. Anyway, twitch.tv, History of Westeros, every Friday at 6 Eastern. It's a lot of fun. Help me make decisions. Help me name my children and my kingdoms and all that. It's a great time. Let's get back to it. The A Storm of Swords Asshai recap. As I said before, these recaps get shorter and shorter as we go. That's why I'm going to do several in a row here. The only little bits here, we've got Mance's cloak. He gets his cloak sewn up with a bit of red silk from Asshai, and it's symbolic of the uniformity and the lack of freedom and independence that's inherent to being a member of the Night's Watch, something that Mance didn't really have the choice in when he was young. He, of course, was born into the Night's Watch. He wasn't really someone who, as an adult, said, yes, I want to join. So for him, it was, yeah. Anyway, so Asshai is kind of an interesting association there, and it's kind of neat to see just the extreme opposite ends of the world there. When something from Asshai appears beyond the wall, well, that's interesting because they're so far apart. But also, red silk in greater quantity shows up beyond the wall on the body of Melisandre. She's wearing red silk as she shows up later in the episode, or in the book. So there's that. But that's at the end of the book. In between, we have Euron, who is introduced. We don't see him, but we hear about him. And one of the things people say about him is, oh, he's been to Asshai and back. And that is a serious mark of badassery. Like, oh, this guy's done that. Okay, then. That's significant. Especially among the Ironborn, but amongst a lot of people, that's a big deal. We actually have the resolution of Sansa and the Black Amethyst from Asshai, which, of course, kills Joffrey. Yep, so that's there. That's Asshai playing a little bit of a role there indirectly. Of course, there's that Quaithe appearance we mentioned, appearing right before Dany seizes the Unsullied, or claims the Unsullied. And then, as I said, Melisandre to the wall. So even though it's a larger book, there's less about Asshai. Dany very explicitly becomes embroiled in Slaver's Bay, right? So, yeah, she intends to go to Westeros afterwards, though, as Quaithe tells her, many people are coming to her. And even though Quaithe says, don't trust any of them, well, some of them know things about dragons. That might be something Dany can make use of, even if she shouldn't trust their goals or their ambitions. She might trust their knowledge about dragons or about other related topics, like Tyrion in particular. Like, Tyrion tells her some things about dragons. I would trust that. If Tyrion's like, wants to get Casterly Rock, or, wants you to kill the Lannisters, well, maybe think twice about that. Although maybe that's still the right play for her, but, consider Tyrion's, his own side of this. So what she doesn't mention, though, is Marwyn. Quaithe doesn't mention Marwyn in her prophecy. So that's interesting. That's the one person among all of those mentioned that's actually been to Asshai. Now, Makoro maybe has. I don't know. So, but setting him aside, because we don't know for sure that he has, Marwyn's definitely been to Asshai, and Quaithe doesn't mention him. So all the people she mentions that are coming to Dany, she says, don't trust any of them. She leaves him out. Is it because she can trust him? Is it because she has been to Asshai and Quaithe actually knows him? Or is it because she's not aware of it? Or, maybe he just isn't going to get to her ever. Maybe Marwyn's going to his ship is going to sink. I really doubt that. That seems unlikely that we would be introduced to this character for him to do so very little. He has revealed almost nothing about anything he knows. All he's basically done is sort of wax on about how the Maesters have this anti-magic conspiracy and how they would have killed Aemon if he had said more things about prophecy, even though they didn't do that to him. Marwyn somehow is above that for some reason, even though everybody talks about how he's associated with magic. Not that I'm doubting him, I'm saying, though, maybe he's exaggerating. Anyway, it's a very big omission. It's really interesting that he's not included. Why didn't Quaithe mention him? Maybe because George hadn't decided that Marwyn is going there. Now, technically, Marwyn didn't get added into the mix for going to Dany until A Feast for Crows. But the character Marwyn existed since the Game of Thrones. Let's not forget that. That character's name was dropped by Mirri Maz Duur in Book 1. So even though maybe George hadn't figured out exactly what he was doing with Marwyn, he absolutely created that character. A maester, archmaester, although maybe he wasn't one at the time. Whatever, doesn't matter. He went to Asshai. That's important. And so there's somebody else that went to Asshai that could get in the mix with Dany and tell her things about it. So again, we've got another person that can be Asshai on the move rather than her going there. So yeah, I really wonder, does Quaithe know Marwyn? That'd be interesting. He probably not. I mean, Asshai is humongous. So, you know, I doubt they just know each other by coincidence, but you never know. And of course, we've mentioned Melisandre. No reason to recap that in terms of her place amongst this group of characters who can teach Dany about things about Asshai. The difference, of course, her being a POV character, but George is still probably going to be sparing with her chapters. She's probably not going to have a lot of them. The A Feast for Crows Asshai recap, right? There's only 3 bullet points on this one here in my notes. Dragons in Asshai, dragons in Qarth, dragons in Meereen, Dothraki dragons, dragons freeing slaves. Each telling differs from the last. That's from the prologue, that quote. All those are sensible. Dragons in Qarth? Yeah, Dany was in Qarth. Dragons in Meereen? Dany's in Meereen. Dothraki dragons. Okay, Dany's on the Dothraki Sea with Drogon. That makes sense too. Dragons freeing slaves? Yeah, obviously. Dragons in Asshai, though, is the first line of that sentence. That one hasn't happened. So it's a little unusual. It's a line of note or a phrase of note. I'm like, dragons in Asshai. Where did that come from? Dany hasn't gone there. She's been given no hint she was going to go there. She didn't talk about going there. She didn't. What is this? I forget which character saying this. Is it Rune or Molander or whatever in the prologue? I don't think it's Sorella. I mean Alaris. Alaris. Yeah. It doesn't matter which one of them is saying it. The point is, where did that particular part of the rumor come from? How did Asshai get in the mix here? I think it's George is being deliberate there to keep it in the mix and to remind people that there's a big association there. Speaking of reminding people, A Feast for Crows has the King's Moot, and when he's pitching himself, selling himself to the Ironborn, he's like, only one living Ironborn has sailed to Asshai and back. That's me. And of course, he also mentions Valyria and these other things. So it comes up at the King's Moot. And this is where I want to take a slight aside to consider Asshai and the Shadowlands as its place in the world and less as a part of Dany's story, which is that all fantasy stories, and of course even our real world, had this in ancient times when people had a concept of the end of the earth or the ends of the earth. Now in Westeros, it really is just the end of the earth because to the west is nothing. Now, we know there's got to be something, but the conception to Westerosi is that there's nothing, right? Only someone like a sea snake who didn't actually really try, or an Alessa Farman who definitely did. Extremely rare example, maybe the only rare example other than that one Stark Lord who vanished going west. So, yeah. So Asshai is our one example. It's the end of the earth from the perspective of Westeros. Yeah. If you go to Yi Ti, it's not. It's their neighbor. And to the Asshai, from their perspective, which we don't really have, take out the really, we don't have that. I'm sure they know what's east, right? At least they have some idea of it. The world doesn't just end there. It's not like a flat world with everything just drops off. Well, maybe it is. I doubt it. There is a horizon in this world, so it's certainly round. Maybe it's like round on one side and flat on the other. It's like a sled upside down. I don't know. Anyway, that's part of why Asshai is able to keep coming up, because anytime you want to mention the farthest point away you can think of, it's Asshai. That's the association there in world. And someone's like, well, to the ends of the earth. Well, you mention Asshai. You say Asshai. You don't say the 5 forts. You don't say the Grey Waste, even though those would be valid things. It's the place that people know about is Asshai because it's a port. People actually sail there and go back and forth from it. It's the few places over there that has both a really dark and unusual and mysterious reputation, but is also a place that people go kind of regularly. At least some people do. So that keeps it in the vernacular. People will talk about it, think about it. Ships come from there. Ships don't come from the Grey Waste. Ships don't come from the 5 forts. Caravans don't come from there. They're relics that are a lot less known to, or not relics, but they're information and sites that are way less known to Westerosi because Westerosi sailors don't go there. And people don't come from Westeros or from there to go to Westeros either, like the Asshai do. Now, in A Dance with Dragons, it's a little longer than A Feast for Crows, but again, not very much. Tyrion finds some Asshai wine in the cellar. Like, that's pretty minor, right? And the galley that delivered him in the barrel of wine, which was not he wasn't in an Asshai wine barrel. But the galley that delivered him, Illyrio says, is on her way to Asshai even now. It will be 2 years before she returns. So in other words, the point of him saying that was, hey, Tyrion, don't worry about people saying you're here, because the ship that brought you here, those folks are already way the hell on the ocean. They're not going to tell anything. And even if they do, it'll be years from now. Melisandre's chapter. Now, one thing I notice about her is that when she's at the wall, she's called Melisandre of Asshai more often. Like, there's the Red Woman, there's just Lady Melisandre. She has a lot of names, a lot of ways that people refer to her, but the name Asshai gets mentioned a little more often. And of course, she drops a really big knowledge bomb in her chapter about it. Not just that she's from there or lived there for a while and all that other stuff, but that it's the second most powerful place she's ever been in terms of actually boosting what she can do with sorcery and illusion and all that. It's the hinge of the world concept. She says the wall is the strongest place she's ever been, but Asshai is next. So there's that. And of course, in Dance of the Dragons, there's the 2 appearances of Quaithe. One in the dream, early in Slaver's Bay, and then the one at the last chapter, which might not be a real vision of Quaithe. Might not have actually been Quaithe appearing to her. It might have just been her imagining Quaithe, like she imagines Viserys and Drogo and Rhaegar and Jorah in that same scene. So, yeah, Quaithe might fall in that category there. Still. So, a few other examples. It continues to be an expression of the known world there. It's from Westeros to Asshai is a phrase that gets said, because those are, to a lot of people, the 2 ends of the world. We hear things about the Traders Circle and the Jade Sea Circle that involve the final stop basically being Asshai. It's like the ultimate port. And once you trade at Asshai, it makes sense. George put a little thought into this. It makes sense that you would want to go home, that you would consider that the stopping point, the final farthest point you want to go to, because it's so wealthy. Yeah, you can trade food for gems and gold at a better rate than anywhere else in the world. It makes sense that once you do that, you're ready to go home. You just got your best part of your profit on your journey. Time to go home. Yeah, use that wealth, turn it in, spend it, give it to your family, whatever. Now, yeah, so again, they know more about the region than Westeros does, and our perspective is very Westerosi. A good example of this is the Summer Islanders. When we talk about Alyssa Farman, and the Sun Chaser, we learn that the Summer Islanders very likely know a lot more about Sithorios than they've told other people, if not other places around the world, because they are an experienced and excellent sailing culture. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, they know about some of these regions that the Westerosi don't. Same applies to the Shadowlands, the people of Asshai, all that. They would know a lot more about their part of the world that we're not privy to. So I did say at the beginning of the episode, there's only like one mention of Asshai and Dunk and Egg, and it's that phrase, Westeros to Asshai, like the widest world. It's an expression of east of the Mississippi. This is the best grits east of the Mississippi, the best pizza west of the Mississippi. It's the best you'll find from Westeros to Asshai. Yeah, that kind of phrase gets said. Like a merchant will say, it's the finest leather from Westeros to Asshai, or something like that. Now, Aegon V did send a mission to Asshai to learn more about dragons, to learn about how to hatch his eggs. He was obviously very concerned with hatching his eggs, and this comes after many of his ancestors also were very concerned with hatching eggs and tried a variety of things, none of which worked, of course. And of course, Aegon V was probably the most intelligent of all these, yet his attempt was by far the most disastrous and horrible. But it's interesting that he tried this, and it's interesting to consider, did the things he learned from Asshai mislead him into this accident somehow, or did he learn the wrong things? Was he misled, or did he misinterpret it? It passed through multiple hands. He didn't go himself. He didn't travel to Asshai personally. So if information came back to him, well, maybe it wasn't reported accurately. Who knows? There's a lot of possibilities there. It's interesting to consider, certainly, that the tragedy is related to perhaps some false information he got or misinterpretation that may have come directly from Asshai. Now, of course, there's lots of world building here that gets mentioned in the World of Ice and Fire. That's a big part of how Asshai is dealt with there, because it's that kind of book. It's a history book. It it's a bit of an atlas in this sense, without as many maps. And one of the things we learned that was very new to us is that it's so big. It's bigger than King's Landing, Braavos, and Volantis combined. It's enormous. But the population is scant. It's probably not even 1/10 full. I would guess it's not even 1/100th full. We also learned about the lack of children and animals. That wasn't known to us. We learned about the Ash River, which has fish that you shouldn't eat because there's something wrong with them. They're mutated, magical. It reminds me of Mantaris, sitting right outside the disaster zone of the Doom of Valyria, where the people and the animals aren't quite right. This is kind of similar. So we have these sort of maybe not parallel cataclysms, but something very supernatural happened to maybe a dragon-riding, dragon-knowledgeable culture that permanently affected them. Even it destroyed them or reduced them and left a permanent impact, like a Chernobyl-type radiation zone in a fantasy setting, whatever that means. Some sort of lingering magic that continues to harm and affect and mutate and whatever. So yeah, there's similarities between Valyria and the Shadowlands, even if it's not necessarily a volcano situation in both. It might be. I mean, the Shadowlands are mountainous, so it could have been a volcanic situation there. There's just also some magic mixed in, right? It can't only be volcanoes, which is pretty much true for the Doom as well. So yeah, Alyssa Farman and the Sea Snake, those both get mentioned in Fire and Blood. Those are completely new characters. The Sea Snake isn't new as of Fire and Blood, but his journey to Asshai was, right? That wasn't really mentioned in the World of Ice and Fire. So we learn that he goes there, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the episode here. It's one of our final topics, and same we'll do with Alyssa Farman and the Sun Chaser, because those are related. But let's talk about the actual Shadowlands. So they're basically a mountainous peninsula. I should have a map up here. Like I said, farthest east. Y'all probably knew that, but it's extremely east. The map just cuts off. It's not like there's a body of water there that separates it. No, we just don't know what's past it. And I mean, there is a body of water near Asshai because it's on a little peninsula there, but most of the map is land getting cut off there, other than those little saffron straits that runs between Ulthos and Essos. The Mountains of the Morn dominate the area. That's kind of a funny name because it sounds like the morning. It's M-O-R-N, not M-O-U-R-N. It's not like mourning the death of people. But it's funny to call it the Mountains of the Morn when the whole region is shadowy. It's like there's no morn here. There's no morning. It's all darkness and shadow. Or is it? Is it a nickname? We don't even know the nature of the shadow. We'll get to that shortly. Some theories on that. On the other side of the Mountains of the Morn is the Hidden Sea. And on the south side of the Hidden Sea is Carcosa. And on the north side is the City of the Winged Men. Quite a name. Farther north is Bone Town. Now, the shadow probably doesn't stretch as far as Bone Town, but it would indirectly impact them. I mean, because you're living next to the shadow, and, you would be dealing with people from it. You'd be aware of it. You'd trade with it, probably. But Carcosa and City of the Winged Men, are they in the shadow? Maybe? I would guess yes. But I could see that the shadow is maybe just limited to the peninsula of Asshai, where the Ghost Grass is. But I don't know. I feel like there's some impact there. It maybe an older impact. I don't know. But I would lean towards yes on that. Which might mean the Hidden Sea is impacted. It might have some of the same problems that the Ash River has, which is the water's not safe, the fish aren't safe, the creatures aren't, just the whole thing is supernaturally off. The Ash River does go from the Mountains of the Morn into the Jade Sea, where I guess the water becomes more normal out in the ocean there. It passes through what's called the Veil of Shadows, which is a narrow pass that's so narrow that it's in shadows at all times of day except at noon, only when the sun is directly above it. So these are some very narrow crevices. So this is one reason for the darkness, is just the mountains are so smushed together that they don't allow a lot of light to get through. So it may not be that there's just this big pall of shadow over everything. It's just there's just lots of mountains that they're pushed together a lot, and you creates a lot of shadow. I prefer it being more supernatural than that, but it's possible this adds to the whole effect of the region. It seems like that. There's a place in this Veil of Shadows, a city of the night called Stygai. It's a corpse city that even Shadowbinders fear. What? Right? We've talked about Stygia a little bit, but here's some things that I don't think we mentioned before. Demons and dragons live in nearby caves, which again, that doesn't really add up. What are demons in this world? What does that even mean? The one example I can think of for something demonic is the voice that Varys refers to in the Blue Flames. But Varys might have made that whole thing up or exaggerated it. We didn't see that. You know, it's creepy, that story of the voice answering. I mean, that is a good story. But part of what makes it good is that it's so convincing that some people, like Tyrion, don't even really think much of it's true, even though Varys is quite the liar, quite the accomplished liar. It's just, he just tells it in a way that's so believable and meaningful, and he sells it so well. Anyway, but the more important thing is dragons. Okay, again, there's no dragons other than the ones that Dany has just birthed, hatched, whatever. So I think that's just maybe an old story. Dragons used to live in these caves. And maybe those are the ones that Bran was seeing in his vision from a time immemorial, or the future or the past. Now, Stygian, of course, is an ancient Greek term meaning associated with the river Styx / goddess Styx, because the river is itself a goddess, or herself is a river. Now, the closer association, even though that's the real world association, is Stygia of Robert E. Howard, which is the Nile in his world. Because in his world, this is Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan, the true father of sword and sorcery. Yes, before J.R.R. Tolkien. He's not nearly as famous, but he operated well before Tolkien. So Tolkien made it way more famous. He was far more successful, but Robert E. Howard got started first. Conan the Barbarian is to this day still very popular. Has been a ton of other authors have written Conan the Barbarian stories. George loved them. They're quite well written, actually. I like them. I'm very fond of them. They're not like high literature or anything, but I think they're very strong. And it's fun to see the father of fantasy at his craft. So, yeah, so in his world, there was a cataclysm that turned the river Styx into the Nile eventually. The world was reshaped. His ancient Egypt came out of that, right? So that's his thing. Now, in his Stygia is a theocracy ruled by sorcerer kings. These rulers are white people who descend from the conquering dynasty, while the general population are brown-skinned and worship the snake god Set, which is an Egyptian deity. So that's the connection there. But the racial makeup is presumably borrowed from what happened in the real world. During the time of Alexander the Great, the Egyptians were conquered, and then when his empire was carved up, it was the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt for generations, and they were, olive-skinned or white folk from Macedonia, ruling over the mostly brown-skinned Egyptians. So that's where that comes from, almost certainly. George loves to borrow from real history, but in this case, he borrowed a little bit of real history, but mostly from a guy who used fictional, fantasized versions of real history. So it's like borrowing, it's like multiple levels of meta here. An older author who also borrowed from real history to make fantasy. Yeah, anyway, that's pretty cool, I think. But also around the Shadowlands, we have a few other features to examine here. There's Ulthos, which is the unexplored, undetailed continent south of Essos. It's very close to Asshai. We can assume the Asshai, know things about it. They've traveled there. Maybe there's missions into those jungles. Maybe there's wealth in those jungles like Sithorios. I kind of doubt it's as dangerous and nasty as Sithorios, because it's just so dangerous and nasty in Sithorios. But I don't know. Maybe this is George R. R. Martin's world. He likes to create, lots of dangerous locations. Another wild, untamed continent is entirely possible. Those Saffron Straits, that name implies wealth. Saffron in the real world, it was like one of the most valuable ancient spices. So I think in a setting that's got the feel of ancient to it, or semi-proto-medieval, saffron's probably worth a lot. So it does kind of reflect on the wealth apparent to Asshai, and the wealth that may have once been much greater. They still have the gold and the gems now, but imagine when they also had like political power and a navy and and armies, if not dragons, and a full population, and farmland, which probably existed before the ghost grass, and whatever. The shadow is probably what wrecked this civilization. and may have made it unsustainable, right? You lose your ability to grow crops. That's going to crush an empire pretty quickly. The whole empire can't feed itself anymore. It's not like they had a lot of other places they could get food from either, apparently. Well, at least as far as we can tell. Where are they going to get it from? The Grey Waste, the plains of the Jogos Nai? Are they going to overrun the jungles of Yee and start turning that into farmland? I don't know. That's not so easy to do, to turn jungles into farmland. It's a slow process. There is a little island called Ulos or Ulos. I don't know how to say it. No one's ever said it. It's only written on the map. It's a little island between Essos and Ulthos. There's a ruined city on it. We don't know how old that is. If it was something that was part of the Great Empire of the Dawn, maybe a trading partner of Asshai in ancient times. Fun to imagine it as sort of an ancient dragonstone. Completely theorizing here, just pulling that out of nowhere. But if Asshai was a great city of dragon lords, this little island could have been like a little holdout, a little fortress for the ultra wealthy, ultra rich, or some particularly powerful dynasty or family. There's also the Manticore Isles, 7 islands west of Asshai that also probably were trading partners or subjects, or maybe the roost of pirates that operated back in the day when there would have been more piracy because of a full civilization operating here and lots of ships going here back and forth. So these are all different possibilities that could happen. Let's cast our mind back to the misshapen statues in Vaes Dothrak that Jorah says are probably from the Shadowlands. So they would worship some misshapen, strange gods there, very Cthulhu-esque, I guess. That's what I'm reminded of whenever I think of dark, kind of scary gods. I think of that world or that setting. But we know caravans come from there. It's kind of weird to think, did the Dothraki go all the way to Asshai to take these gods away? That seems a little strange. So I don't really believe that. That's too far for the Dothraki to go. And the Dothraki aren't like some ancient people that have been ranging far and wide for eons. No, the Dothraki are kind of a recent phenomenon in terms of dominating and conquering their area. They were not very powerful in the time of Valyria. So I don't really buy that some Khalasar rode all the way to Asshai and dragged those statues all the way back through the Bone Mountains. I think they probably stole them from someone else who stole them, or they were perhaps a relic of an even more ancient time when the Great Empire of the Dawn was large enough to have built some of these shadows much farther away from the proper city of Asshai. Maybe they were built even on the other side of the Bone Mountains, and the Dothraki stole them from there. The Dothraki did wreck a lot of cities and took a lot of statues. So maybe there were gods of the Shadowlands, statues of them in, say, the Kingdom of Sarnor, which is where the majority of the Dothraki pillaging and destruction happened. So that's entirely possible. Either way, we know caravans come from the Shadowlands. That's what Dany was confronted with or met in Vaes Dothrak. Those were caravans going back and forth all the way from the Shadowlands to Vaes Dothrak, to the Mother of Mountains. And that would involve passing through the Bone Mountains and a lot of other regions. So that's a lot of stuff. They've got very valuable goods there, though. They can bring gems and sell them for, again, cheaper than they can get anywhere else in the world, probably. And these are markets that otherwise wouldn't have access to this preponderance of gold and gems. I mean, who's bringing huge amounts of wealth all the way to Vaes Dothrak? Well, these guys are. Maybe not all in one single caravan, but over time you've got good deal on sapphires, good deal on rubies, good deal on emeralds, just repeatedly, and that'll add up over time, right? And you think about where that wealth comes from. It's not coming from Asshai, the city proper, the mines where these emeralds and rubies and diamonds or whatever, they're not literally inside the city, even though it's huge enough I could believe there's mines inside the city because it's so gosh darn huge. But most of it most certainly comes from the Mountains of the Morn. The wealth that is probably controlled by various clans or factions within the Shadowlands of whom we know very little. These masked entities, these groups that we don't know how to define these groups. Are they tribes? Are they clans? Are they towns, villages? What do they even have there? We don't know. All we know is the Asshai, this big, mostly abandoned city, certainly there have to be other smaller things nearby. They just aren't on the map. Another trade good from Asshai that comes from outside the city is amber, which is kind of neat. Amber is kind of rare. It's usually more associated with the north. So I assume there's maybe some colder places in the mountains where that comes from. Amber doesn't... I don't think amber is common or happens at all in warmer weather, but I could be corrected on that. I don't know that one very well. So maybe those same caravans that go to Vaes Dothrak would also go to places like the city of Winged Men and Carcosa and Bonetown, assuming those places aren't hostile to the Shadow Men, which is also possible. Imagine something more fearful than the Shadowlands. Like, no, we don't go. We're the Shadow Men, and everybody's scared of us or shuns us. But even we don't go to the Grey Wastes because the Shrikes, those are even worse. Maybe. I don't know that. It's just a possibility. The Shrikes do sound worse than the Shadow Men. I would guess that the lizard people or whatever those things are that live in the Grey Waste are worse than the Shadow Men. I mean, they're not even human, probably. Well, at least the Shadow Men are probably human, or mostly human. And what about sources of food, though? Are they getting, again, the Shadowlands most likely is a place that is tough to have lots of crops, and yeah, the ghost grass is an issue. The sky might be dark. That's bad for crops. So food is probably a big problem there. There might be cannibalism. Maybe they eat the Shrikes. They're so hardcore. They're like, no, we're not afraid of the Grey Waste. Shrikes are food. Lizard people, good eating. Yeah. Bone Town, any meat left on that bone? Yeah. The Shadow Men there are looking far and wide for food. But let's talk about a little more about the nature of the actual shadow. Like, is it just dark there? Again, is it about the mountains being close together? Is it some kind of permanent haze? Is it like a Mordor kind of place? And Mordor, of course, is Lord of the Rings. It's like a volcanic landscape. It's this one particular mountain, Mount Doom, Amon Amarth, is constantly erupting and spewing ash into the sky. So it's the land where shadows lie. It's in semi-permanently encased in shadow because of the volcanic gas that's blocking the sun. Is that what's going on here? Something like that would make sense. It's obviously well known that George is majorly influenced by Tolkien. So yeah, it could just be, that could explain the shadow. It could be ash blocking the sun. Volcanic ash, not Ashaya over there. She's not blocking the sun. But even if that's the case, there's got to be a supernatural element to it. Even if there's a natural element to it, some of it's natural, some of it's got to be supernatural. Because again, the Ash River with its weird fish and the magic and the lack of children, something else is going on. Maybe the lack of children and animals can be explained by disease or unhealthy conditions, but nothing explains the river, the Ash River, and the Corpse City, whatever that even is. I mean, it's pretty hard to say all of this is just rumor in the game of telephone, especially when we know for sure that huge amounts of magic are practiced inside the city. So it can't all be contained within the city. In fact, we know it's not. For example, Mirri Maz Duur. We're going to talk about her again in a minute, but just as a preview of that, she said she learned her necromancy spell from a blood mage from the Shadowlands. Not from Asshai, from the Shadowlands. Maybe in Asshai is where she got the lesson, but the mage was born somewhere out there in the Mountains of the Morn or by the Ash River. And the Ash River kind of reminds me of what's the... I'm blanking on the river by the Hellholt, the yellow... The Brimstone, yeah. That has a bit more of a natural explanation, though. Just lots of sulfur. But still, it's a place where only the locals can survive. If you're not born there, it'd be real hard to adapt to it. It has that vibe to it. So Mantaris, the Brimstone, lots of maybe familiar, and Valyria, of course. These are all parallels with respect to, we know more about those things than we know about what the nature of the shadow is. But these are the best comparisons I think we have. So yeah, Dany isn't going there, so we seek these metaphorical answers, these for the references in her chapters, or at least shadows that aren't the Shadow-by-Asshai. But we're still interested in it from a world-building perspective, for the sake of knowing, and again, for perhaps the sake of other stories. I think that we might get a show about the sea snake, and well, the sea snake show is going to want to go to Asshai. That's one of the coolest places they could go, and that's explicitly written about. He did apparently go there. Same maybe with Alyssa Farman. So there's a lot of potential there. What if we get that EET show? Well, Asshai's their neighbor. The Shadow Men have sent like reavers and pirates into Yee-Ti. Again, this isn't necessarily some central authority doing it, but there's raiders, reavers, pirates that live in the Shadowlands, and they attack more civilized nations like Yee-Ti, at least in current times. Who knows what happened back in ancient times? So yeah, what happened? Was it a magical fallout? I think so. I think it was a magical fallout. But the question is, was it an accident, like a self-inflicted thing? Or was it like the Doom of Valyria? The predominant theory, at least in my mind, is the one that says the sorcerers of Valyria that were keeping the force of the volcanoes at bay was undone by assassinations of too many of those sorcerers, perhaps at the hands of the Faceless Men. Or helped by the assassinations. They were definitely killing some of each other, the different houses of Valyria, from what we're told. But the Faceless Men may have tipped the scales to the point where it caused the doom. Either way, the doom certainly has a supernatural element to it as well. So, but if it wasn't self-inflicted, which is that's a tried and true like trope for some ancient powerful civilization, is that they wrecked themselves. It was an internal struggle or a failure of their own arrogance or pride, like Valyria, or just that caused their own ruin, because it's maybe a little more satisfying or more interesting than some enemy did it to them. But that's definitely possible. However, I mean, what enemy? Well, who destroyed the Great Empire of the Dawn? We're told the Great Empire of the Dawn was destroyed by the Long Night. That's what wrecked it. So if it's self-inflicted, then we can maybe imagine that, well, the Great Empire of the Dawn also had a role in causing the Long Night. That would make sense.
I imagine that's the intersection of the Mountains of the Morn type imagery, the night and the morning and shadow and light, like all of that is very tied together, right? Yeah,
you're right. That is the dichotomy there. It's everything there is associated with those two halves, mostly the shadow, but also, sometimes the light is the opposite. It stands in that contrast.
Gotta have the light to have the shadow.
That's true. Melisandre says the shadows are servants of R'hllor because they don't exist without light. It's an interesting argument by both Melisandre and other Red Priests, and by George R. R. Martin. So yeah, what enemy could have done that to them if it was an enemy? Yee-Ti? Yee-Ti was the supposed successor state that followed the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Golden Empire of Yee-Ti, picked up after the Long Night. But it doesn't make them the cause or the enemy that inflicted the shadow upon the region of Asshai. But it does give us, there's a lot there. There's magic, dragons, massive wealth. This gives us context for just how powerful ancient Asshai and or the Great Empire of the Dawn was. If you were trying to design a rich, powerful city, it's perfectly placed. It's on that peninsula, so it's perfectly situated for trade by the wealthy sounding Saffron Straits, all the gold and gems that I keep mentioning. So they just have everything. They have everything going for them. Supernatural power, probably military power thanks to the dragons, probably naval power on top of that, but maybe they didn't even need that, but probably that was there too. And all the wealth, the trade, just everything, until the shadow, ruined it. So yeah, because we're not assuming that you built a giant city after the shadow fell on that region. That would be weird. Like, yeah, let's build the biggest city in the world in a place that can't grow crops. That doesn't make sense. In a place that's permanently shadowed or whatever, a place surrounded by ghost grass. That's the worst place for a city. But if you imagine it without the shadow, it's like the best place. Valyria was kind of similar in that regard, and it's what makes it, again, a compelling parallel. It had a lot of those same basic elements. Right in the center of the known world, it's a peninsula that sticks out, makes it great for trade. They've got powerful nations that are not as powerful as them in every direction that they can enrich themselves in. They take slaves from every direction. And of course, they also had vast wealth to pull out of their own mountain ranges that were close by. They have the silver and gold mines that we learn the Faceless Men sort of came to being in, right? So that's very similar. And of course, the long-standing parallel of both these very powerful civilizations likely collapsed because of some sort of magical fallout or accident. Yeah, the Doom came for Valyria, and the Shadow came for Asshai. Now, yeah, the idea could have been, yes, if we're looking at it from the perspective of whoever this enemy was, if it was an enemy, you can make sense of it like a weapon, because it was awfully perfect. Maybe the Shadow is a self-inflicted wound, but it's just so perfect to ruin them without destroying it. It's the region became so food deprived that you can't support this powerful civilization anymore. Everything was left standing for the most part, it seems, but the people just couldn't live there anymore. It's a really interesting way to have a civilization fall apart or lose its ability to maintain its power, its grip on the region, if not the world. It wasn't destroyed entirely like Valyria. It was undone by the destruction of the land around it. Not the destruction of the land, but the ruining of the region. Again, the supernatural devastation of it. Yeah. So maybe the Long Night originated there, and there's a remnant of it still. Maybe the Long Night still lingers in there. That could be the explanation for the Shadow. The Shadow was pushed back everywhere except in this one spot where it first originated, where it has its most strength, where it first started. And you could never be fully purged, or at least not with the means available to the people of that region. They don't know what to do anymore. So much time has passed. Yeah, because again, another piece of evidence that it's supernatural and is that a natural disaster wouldn't linger like this for thousands of years. You know, it'd be one thing for it to linger for even a decade or two, but. And then we have Ghostgrass. What else says supernatural than that? I mean, it's very blatant, right? And it seems to be getting worse. The return of magic, the return of dragons, which could be an association here. We get this quote, this very alliterative quote. Ghost grass grows in the Garden of Gehenna. What does that mean? Does that mean it's growing there where it hadn't grown before? Or it had been dormant and started growing again? So ghost grass is powered by the magical energies of the world. And if magical energies are on the rise, then ghost grass feeds off that and grows. So it's interesting to think that if dragons coming back to the world have restored magic to the world, and the ghost grass is growing because of that, then it's dragons are part of the problem. they're indirectly causing ghost grass. That's interesting to consider. But we also have no idea what causes ghost grass to grow in the first place. We just know it's an affliction around Asshai in the Shadowlands, and we're not entirely sure how far it goes. Does it reach up into Carcosa and the City of the Winged Men, for example? That's a question we have. If the Shadow is in that area, then maybe the ghost grass is too. Or maybe the other way around. Maybe ghost grass has slowly but surely crept up to that region, you know, like at the rate of the moving of the continents, or maybe something a little faster than that. Something very slow. Because, you know, if we assume that the Shadow is 10,000 years old or more, and Ghostgrass has originated around the same time or at the same time and has slowly grown like Jorah tells Dany it's doing. Like one day Ghostgrass will cover the entire world. It seems like we're a very, very long time from that. Unless, of course, it starts growing a lot more rapidly. But at its current pace, it's growing very, very slowly. And I definitely wonder just how far it's permeated into other regions. And are there people who've taken note of that? They're like, yep, I've been living in this region for 30 years and ghost grass was on the other side of that creek. Now it's on this side. Because that's how the Shadowlanders talk. They speak a little bit like Southerners from the U.S. So there's a lot of possibilities there. It's one of these sandboxes. The Shadowlands are a sandbox of mystery and magic that we don't have a lot of answers on, and we may never get more. But I think we'll get some more. We certainly won't get a lot of firm answers. We're definitely going to be, a lot of it's going to be left shrouded in mystery, but I definitely think we'll get more. The people that live there, this is something I think is super interesting. Yes, we've talked about the people of Asshai and the people of the Shadowlands. They're not the same thing. It's like saying, well, people in New York State aren't the exact same as people who live in New York City. There's things they have in common, but like rural and city people or urban people, there's differences there. And the differences might be larger in a place like this where Well, there's the Shadow. It's just the whole ball game is different. Now, we know that there's no children in Asshai, but there's got to be children in the Shadowlands, right? Like, there wouldn't be people at all if there's no kids in this region, right? It just doesn't, that's not sustainable. Like, only people move there? Why would anyone move there if it's that toxic? And what do the locals think of Ghostgrass? What do they think of the actual Shadow? Is it a religious thing? Is it a sacred thing? Is it something they have to live with? Is it like they view it as something they deserved because of the sins of their ancient ancestors? Is they have a prophecy about the day, one day the shadow will fade, the light will return? Do they think Ghostgrass is going to consume the whole world one day? Is that just a Dothraki thing? Maybe the Dothraki got it from these other cultures who are much older than them. So yeah, there's got to be towns and villages not on the map, but to the scale, to the scope, like what does a Shadowmen village look like? Is it really tiny, or is it like the Wildlings, the Free Folk, where they live in very small enclaves and there's almost nothing that's anywhere remotely the size of a city other than Asshai itself? That seems unlikely. If there was a great, powerful empire, a city, there would be some other, at least ruins that people could live in and repurpose at least part of the way. It seems unlikely that Asshai is, given it's so huge, there's no other cities in the region besides that one city on Ulos. Seems unlikely, right? But I do think that a lot of them probably live in the mountains, which those might not be ruined cities. They might just be, caves and stuff, whatever you can find. Maybe there's lots of mushrooms growing in those caves. There's a food supply that might be viable in that area. Again, the scarcity of food would have to do with a lot of where people choose to live in that region. So again, as I said a minute ago, there's characters from Asshai and characters from the Shadowlands, and here's where we see the difference illustrated in a Dany chapter. Quote,
"She enjoyed watching all the people, too. Dark, solemn Asshai and tall, pale Qartheen, the bright-eyed men of Yee-Tee and monkey-tail hats, warrior maids from Biasabad, Samiriana, and Kaya with iron rings in their nipples and rubies in their cheeks, even the dour and frightening shadow men who covered their arms and legs and chests with tattoos and hid their faces behind masks."
So we don't know any regular shadow men, really. We've seen them, like these ones. Quaithe is one, but I wouldn't call her regular. And again, Mirri Maz Duur's teacher also wouldn't call that person regular. Don't know if that was we don't know the gender of that teacher. Presumably they wore a mask, though. So the masks are a big deal here. We've seen masks elsewhere, like with the brazen beasts, and the impact is similar in that it creates some anonymity and some separation between individuals and groups. But those are all guardsmen in the case of the brazen beast. They're not an entire culture. This is something that permeates all levels of society, which is very different. And I really wonder about that. Got some interesting thoughts here on that. At least I think they're interesting. Red lacquer seems to be the common variety of masks. That is the one that Quaithe wears, and she's not nearly the only one. And that creates even more anonymity. The more people wear a similar red lacquer mask, the more uniform it is, the harder it is to tell people apart. And yeah, you can think of masks, you can think of like shapes and sizes and varieties, like endless versions. Like masking, it's really truly infinite, the options there. But if everyone's wearing a similar like featureless red lacquer mask, which is what we're told, then that would add to the anonymity. Surely they're not 100% uniform. There isn't some singular mask factory that churns out red leather masks for all the citizens of Asshai and the Shadowlands. But it's very common, and that speaks to it being a very important cultural thing because it's also lingered for so long. One of my theories, my favorite theory, is that some traditions say that, or they describe the long night as the sun hiding its face from the world. So this is maybe a connection. The people of the Shadowlands hiding their faces from the world. And this is maybe what I was saying about like some sort of shame. Like maybe their people, they feel like we caused the long night. Our ancestors caused the long night. This is our shame. We wear these masks because we don't dare show our faces to the sun because we're the sun doesn't love us or something like that. Strange cultural traditions can develop like that. That would be fitting for this. It's just my idea. I don't know that that's really it. But something very powerful is, and I don't mean supernaturally powerful, I mean some very strongly held belief is keeping this masking tradition alive for a very long time. And you might think, okay, well, that's not a big deal. Yeah, it is, though, because masks make you untrustworthy. If you're in the society that wears masks, you're probably cool with it. But look at how the Dothraki reacted to it. They weren't, although they have at other times, they weren't reacting to Quaithe being a magic user. They don't like magic users, like I said. That is a problem for them. But they were like, no, don't listen to shadow men. Don't listen to the spawn of shadows who wear masks. They didn't even say, don't listen to her prophecy. Don't listen to blood magic. Don't listen to sorcery. They could have, and they had done that with Mirri Maz Duur. But instead of referring to her being a magic user, which was the thing that they spat on about Mirri Maz Duur, they were like, shadow person, mask wearer. They were prejudiced against that. They thought, yeah, these people, they hide their faces from the sun. There's something wrong with them. That to them was more distrustworthy than sorcery, which the Dothraki have an extreme cultural rejection of. They really are against the magi as well. So it really is telling that it was the shadow, the face thing, the mask part that got them more than the magic in Quaithe's example. Now, there's no such thing as vampires in A Song of Ice and Fire, the World of Ice and Fire that we know of, but this is where they would live. The Shadowlands, right? Isn't that the perfect, like, yeah, the sun doesn't shine there. This is perfect for us. Let's talk real briefly about real-world masking tradition and culture because it explains some of this point I'm making about the Shadowlands and how masking is a really big deal because of it causes other cultures to distrust and shun. And sometimes even within the same culture, it causes that. So to continue to allow themselves to present themselves to the rest of the world in a manner that causes distrust means they must believe very sincerely in it, or it's a very important cultural tradition. We've got a couple of images here. Shay is putting one on screen. Masks are so old in the real world. Masks are older than writing, which that's probably not surprising. Writing isn't that young, but it's pretty old. I mean, it's older than like hieroglyphics and stuff like that, probably. Maybe not like cave paintings, but it's super old. We have masks that are like 9,000 years old that are still around. Like this one that's on screen, I believe, is that old. There's seashell masks that are that old. This one on screen was found in the Israel, Palestine, Jordan area, the so-called Holy Land, before it was the Holy Land. This predates that. This predates any of that stuff.
This one was from 7,000 BCE.
Yeah.
Crazy and still really creepy then and now. I'm one of those people that is disturbed by masked figures. Just removing all features is the thing. That by itself, that's creepy. Like when you just have eye holes, that's creepy, right? And this is what like the Shadowlands do that. Which is, all they do is they add a little color, they add a little red lacquer to it. Other than that, it's just this featureless, like, yeah, that's scary. Like removing the individuality, removing the identity, it looks wrong. Yeah, it's like it takes away the elements that make you human. So it's widely believed by anthropologists / archaeologists, both really, that there's far more masks that would have been much older than that, but they were probably made of wood and they're not around anymore. Wood wouldn't last 9,000 years, or let alone even 4 or 5,000 years. I don't even know, but certainly not 9. There's some cultures where judges have worn masks to protect them from violence, from retribution from the people they're judging. Not a very popular thing, though, in historically speaking. Mostly people prefer that the anonymity of judges to not exist. You want to know who's giving out justice. It's too important to... Yes, you can understand why you would want to protect the judges from a violent constituency in a lot of different historical contexts, but also you can see the other side of it where it's like, no, we got to know who it is that's upholding the law over us. Like, this is a very important power. We can't just have this person that's... Maybe it's not the same person. They're maybe switching it out on us. Yeah.
One of the most common associations is funeral masks. Funeral masks appear in many cultures. I can't even list them. There's just too many. You name it, especially because it's something that isn't necessarily part of their culture from all time. You might have a culture that had a couple hundred years of funeral masks being in vogue, and then maybe time passes and they stop doing that. And then maybe they come back to it later. They're like, hey, they have a renaissance. Not the renaissance, but, culture can be cyclical, like certain things are uncool and they get cool again, right? Fashion is cyclical. Same, masks are a extension of fashion. Many, if not most, modern cultures, though, are hostile to masking, right? Especially if it's for COVID, right? It's just a lot of, actually, that's not true. Really, that was mostly an American thing. But I digress. I'm not talking about that kind of masking. I'm talking about masking as a means of changing your identity, as hiding your identity, or as taking on a role, as playing a character, as a religious ritual. It's a threat to authority, though. Again, just in the same reason why people wouldn't want judges wearing masks, because you kind of it's more important to know who they are than it is to protect their identity. The same thing happens here. You don't want thousands or hundreds of masked citizens just doing things that you have no accountability for, because you can't identify them. Because people walking around in masks, we can't know who the bad guys are. We can't know who's committing crimes. You walk into a bank wearing a mask, I mean, that's bad. They're going to think you're there to rob it, I mean, this has been true for thousands of years. Not robbing banks, but very often masks are associated by people of means and power with either rebelling against that authority or coming to take that wealth. The Mongol Empire was extremely tolerant of all sorts of religions. That was one of the reasons they were able to spread so far and wide, is that they, even though they were extremely violent to resistance, they were very tolerant to the day-to-day lives of citizens. They basically said, hey, you can worship whatever god you want as long as you include the Mongol Empire. The Khan has to be included in your prayers. Otherwise, go for it. But they were not cool with masks. They wiped out a lot of masking traditions that were in various different peoples they ruled. They were very anti that. Islamic doctrine prohibits figural art of humans or animals. So you can't have you can't have like an animal mask or human mask. It's just against Islamic doctrine. There may be some exceptions. I'm not an expert, but pretty straightforward. Now, don't confuse a niqab or a burqa with a mask. That's not a cultural ritual. That's about subordination. That's about authority. So that's kind of the opposite. The government mask they're putting on you to keep you in control. It's a different kind of thing. So, yeah. Now, China, same thing. Masks are seen as counter-revolutionary in China because they don't fall in line with communism. Similar things happened under Stalin, which actually that's kind of funny to think about. Like you would think of like a uniformity might be exactly what communism is all about. But no, it was actually people who would stand up to communism didn't want to be identified. Right? It's the same thing. I want to be able to strike against the government and then fade into the population. And you can do that in a low-tech environment with masks, especially when there's lots of people that have masks and you've got, hundreds, if not thousands of masked individuals that you're trying to keep track of. You can understand why they would just ban masks entirely. Say, no one's allowed to wear a mask. Then we don't have this problem at all. Well, they might have other problems, but not that one. Stalin, same thing. Stalin was anti-mask. Russia has changed in that regard somewhat, but, again, these things are cyclical. They change, they come and go. But mostly, most authoritarian structures, most governmental structures have been hostile to masks. Christianity doesn't get along with masking traditions very well either. Traditional masquerades, plays, balls, when Christianity started to become more aggressive and more like telling people how to live their lives, these masquerades were recast by the church as demonic. It was like, oh, this is the work of the devil. These masks are devilish. They're demonic. They're depicting figures that are blasphemous or stand against Christ, things like that. Called pagan. And they were also removed in the same way that a lot of Christianity overwrote paganism, a lot of various types of paganism. By one of the methods was, we'll have a holiday on the same day as an existing pagan holiday. We'll set a holiday on that same day, sort of to cross it out, sort of. Like we'll have our holiday on the same day, and it kind of cancels theirs out. More people will celebrate ours, and eventually people will forget about that other one. They did the same thing with masking. This fusion started to remove traditions and rituals and make them more about just fun and more about drama and art rather than sacred rituals, which was what they were more a problem for authority, right? They don't care. Authority doesn't care as much about drama and plays and art. That's when it started to become more accepted. Carnival, Commedia dell'arte, right? That's an example of that fusion. Masks there were much simpler. The idea with masks in an environment like that is, oh, that's the mask of that character, of John or Bill or whatever. That's how you know. So it doesn't matter what actor it is. You go, oh, I know that character. It's the beginning of familiar characters on the stage that you don't need to be explained who that is. You're like, oh, I recognize that character. I've seen that face before. So the mask is meant as an identifier. That's not as much of a threat to authority. But another example of both colonialism and Christianity pushing aside masking culture is Hawaii. Hawaii had a big masking culture. Not as much anymore. It was really pushed back aggressively. There's still a lot of masking traditions in the U.S. among the Hopi, the Zuni, the Navajo, the Apache. And the reason some of these still exist, it's very interesting. Partly because they've carried the traditions, they're serious about them, but they have managed to preserve them in one way by forbidding any outside photography or filming of them. There are no pictures of these masks allowed. Maybe some of them exist, but you're not going to find them easily on the internet, that's for sure. They're not on Wikipedia. They're not on any articles. You can't find them anywhere in public spaces like that because they just forbid it. Some of these same masks, maybe they've used for years or hundreds of years, if not more, but no one's allowed to film them, the masks or the ceremonies. So there you go. It keeps it mysterious, like Asshai in a way, by keeping it out of sight of people who don't belong. There's exceptions, of course, like a thing like Mardi Gras in New Orleans. You cannot wear masks in New Orleans except during Mardi Gras. I mean, you can wear one like to costume parties, but there's statutes against it for a lot of reasons. Like, again, because it's a way for lower classes to use violence or intimidation against upper classes. And yes, it can go both ways, but this is why they're banned, because it hurts the upper class more than it helps them. Here's another example, just around the world. I was looking at various masks and stuff like that. It's still popular in Africa, Central Asia, and the Melanesian Islands, for example. There's still a lot of masking that goes on there, a lot of masking traditions. Japan still is. Buddhism sort of changed it, but didn't eliminate it, just altered it. There's one that I think Ashay has on screen now, or is about to. This wall of faces. How cool is that? It looks kind of like the Faceless Men, but these are. It just goes to show each of these masks represents an ancestor. These are funeral masks, and so they are celebrated and remembered. There are ways to remember the dead. It looks a little creepy to some people, even to me. But
they're Guatemalan.
Guatemalan, that's right. Thank you for that. And but to them, of course, to the Guatemalans, I doubt it looks creepy at all. They grew up with it. It's normal, and it's respectful to their ancestry, and it's fitting. Yeah.
Yeah, see, these are masks that don't creep me out as much. But one, someone isn't wearing it right now, so there's that. Just seeing them hung on a wall is different to me than seeing someone walking around in them. But they all have such personality. Like, I can see the person memorialized in each of these masks. They're not fake. They're not, they're
trying to look humanish.
They're trying to look human. They're trying to be distinct. Whereas those other masks, the stone mask, the ancient mask, was very personalityless,
unhuman, or it's not like adding either featureless, or they're adding things like horns and just other things that clearly aren't human, like snarling teeth or fangs or whatever.
That's their grandfather. I see that's their grandfather.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very different vibe. So you can see this really goes all over the place with the variety of cultural understanding, belief, worship, sacred, ancestry, all these different elements that are present in some degree or another. Particularly true for the ritualistic masks and sacred masks are the concepts that we see with Faceless Men. Because in those cases, you are channeling the person in that mask. You put on this mask and you're supposed to behave like that being. You're supposed to like channel that energy or be that thing or that person, which is what happens when you wear someone else's skin in a Game of Thrones. You wear their faceless men's skin. You feel their emotions. Arya had those flashes of who that person was. She felt the emotions and pain and suffering of the person that once wore that skin. It was hers, like the person that skin came from. So that element is captured here in a lot of real world societies and has been since time immemorial, is that you put on that mask and you become that person or that god or that animal. Same for performances. I mean, that's true even if you're just putting on, I'm becoming Joe the actor, or Joe the character. Whatever. My names are not very creative here. Joe and John, the actors. Yeah. Good job, Aziz. So that's how, so another element that comes up in fantasy, sci-fi sometimes, well, really it's a fantasy thing, is the idea of a cursed mask. Like you put this mask on and you acquire that person's personality, but there's some evil sorcerer, some evil being that drives you to do bad things. So let's bring this all back to Shadow Man. Again, even the Dothraki don't trust them. So this is a way to maybe make the Shadow people that they're so masked and so stubborn about that. It's such a big part of their culture, and they've been this way for so long. Is there an ancient, untamable, resistant to authority? Masks represent the unknown. It represents this lack of individuality. Deities and powers that are not associated with the state, let alone controlled by it. It's all that stuff, the Reavers and the pirates. So again, it is a little bit like the free folk of the Far East, where just all their values, the way they live, the environment that they live in, the actual shadow, all these things seek or combine to make them a very difficult people, a people that's unlikely to self-organize into large civilization, unlikely to live in cities and things like that. These are people that are very tied to the nature of the region they live in, and it's a region that is very outstanding, and if not supernatural. But the other side of this is interesting. We think of the anonymity, the masks, and how we don't have individuality because of that. But they all have the tattoos. They're covered in tattoos, which that's not uniform. It's hard for me to think that the tattoos are just they're all have the same tattoos. That doesn't really. I don't really believe that. It's possible. But
tattoos could look pretty similar to an average person, and a shadow man can see all these differences, but they all look the same to any normal person. That would
be interesting if they're done in intricate ways that people from that culture can tell. I like what you're saying there. That's a good call. Yeah, that would fit. That works for me. They're able to tell the differences more easily than outsiders would. It's like, was that the guy with that's the same, these tattoos? Yeah.
To be fair, when you see some tribal tattoos, I'm in the same boat that I couldn't exactly tell the difference between certain swirly tattoos.
Oh, you're totally. I mean, think about the running humor that exists with people getting random Asian characters as tattoos. There's totally a lot of examples of people that have gotten Asian characters that mean gibberish. So you see to a person who doesn't speak that language, and that looks cool. There's just some Asian characters that looks neat, but it actually says snowman or
it says it poorly too. It looks like it's in Comic Sans. To boot. I've seen not only the meaning but often just the tone of the lettering is so off.
Do you realize your tattoo says hog face? I thought it said high intelligence. Nah, sorry. Yeah. So it could be a thing like that where it means a lot more to them than to outsiders, and it helps them identify each other in ways that is not so clear to outsiders. That's pretty cool. I love that idea. Now, I think they should also be compared to the Dornish because, the free folk, there's some strong comparisons there, but the Dornish as well, because of the mountains and the temperature. The climate is in line with Sithorios. So it's probably hot. I mean, maybe high up in those mountains, it's probably cold. Not maybe, almost certainly is. So there's still some cold weather people probably in the region. But I think if you're living in the lower mountains and hills and ground level and around the Ash River and outside, just generally near the outside of Asshai, it's probably hot. Probably a warm, if not hot region.
Hot as hell.
Hot as hell. It should be said as well that they are perhaps a more sorcery-oriented people as well. Just because sorcery is so old in that place, it's been there for so long, and there's so many magic users in Asshai, you'd think that there's a little more knowledge floating around. There's a few more people that know how to do it, even if just on a smaller scale. Like, I'm not saying there's like people like calling down thunderbolts left and right, but more people who have minor scrying or little things of magic that parallels of which don't exist in Westeros. Not that it's easy to learn how to do it, just that maybe it's a little easier to find teachers and people who know how to do it. That doesn't mean you can master it, but there's be more opportunities for that. For example, I referred to this earlier, Mirri Maz Duur. Here's what she says, quote,
I learned the way in Asshai and paid dear for the lesson. My teacher was a blood mage from the Shadowlands.
Paid dear for the lesson. So she gave deer? She traded several deer. How much venison? No, I'm just kidding. She paid dearly for the lesson, yeah. George R. R. Martin does like consequences for magic. That's a big part of his work. He loves the mystery and the consequences for using magic. Touching on these unseen forces shouldn't be easy. It should come with a cost. Consequences are a cost. It sounds like Mirri Maz Duur did. Pay dearly for the lesson. I wonder what that means. A price like what Stannis paid to Melisandre, the sapping of some of his life energy to create shadows. And Mirri Maz Duur did create shadows. They were laughing and dancing in the tent as she performed that ritual on Khal Drogo. And it might be the same shadows that Patchface is talking about. The shadows come to dance, the shadows come to play, all that. Who knows which shadow is such a vague term that pops up in so many places. That's why we spent so much talking about it today. So many various types of shadows and all that. As we discussed in the Melisandre episode, she learned shadow binding in Asshai, and it's only associated there. Remember that other red priests don't seem to have the skill. It seems to be very much limited to, that's where you learn how to shadow bind. Makes sense that the Shadowlands are where you learn shadow binding. They would have that association. They'd be the ones who learn to live with it, learn to use it, learn to manipulate it, learn to maybe have it work for them rather than just kind of ruin their lives and get rid of all the food. If people still live there, there's got to be some benefit to it. And the story of Lightbringer, the forging of Lightbringer, involves Nissa Nissa's death. That's very dark. It's blood magic-y, right? This sword goes into her heart to make it work, to forge it correctly. Like it's pretty dark, right? That's blood magic. You killed someone to make the sword. It's maybe how Valyrian steel is made too. So I do think that with their masks and living in fantasy apocalyptic conditions, it's kind of like they're the equivalent of the nuclear fallout dystopia setting of sci-fi, like a Fallout or a Borderlands maybe type setting. If not even a setting like vaguely like a zombie movie film where everything is messed up, but people have learned to survive there. And it fits as well that a lot of them are pirates and reavers. You've got this just downtrodden, difficult place to live, maybe a place where it's survival of the fittest. And that's what people in survival of the fittest type lands end up doing quite a bit of. Pirating and reaving and raiding and all that. We know that they've been a trouble for Yi Ti. The Maroon Emperors, one of the many dynasties of Yi Ti, actually moved their court to the place called Jinki to better deal with them, to have direct access to fighting them at the border, to confront them directly rather than allowing their subordinates to deal with it. So they took a more aggressive approach, a more forward-thinking approach about dealing with this, which must have been a big problem. It must have been a significant problem for them to move their court to deal with raiders and reavers. These are serious raiders and reavers if you're moving your imperial capital to deal with them. Yeah, that's not a small problem. Carl Karsnark comments and says, Asshai is George R. R. Martin's homage to the Gormenghast Gothic novel series about a giant, never-ending city castle ruled by undying elites by British author Mervyn Peake. Yeah, I've heard of Gormenghast, and I've, of course, have heard of Mervyn Peake, and Mervyn Peake House Peak. That's the crossover there, the parallel there. I should read Gormenghast, and I do like a giant never-ending castle / city. That does sound like Asshai. Good call. Once again, want to remind you folks that we very much rely on your support. Patreon is our lifeblood. It's the thing that keeps this show going. Our ability to attract sponsors is intermittent. It happens, but it's not consistent. And you guys are the consistent thing. You're what enables us to do these off the beaten path topics. And these days, there are more and more things that we can provide as bonuses for signing up. For one thing, you can get no ads. That's very nice. You get to eliminate all the network ads in the podcast versions. We can't do that for the videos because it's too hard to have two different versions of such large files. But with podcast episodes, it's quite easy for us. We also give bonus episodes. The most recent one is part 2 of our Red Kraken episode. We had it's part 2 of 2. This one's called The Lioness, the Kraken, and the Seahorse. And it details the end of the Red Kraken and the struggle against him. And it's got some Alan Velaryon, a.k.a. Oakenfist, and some other interesting characters, including Johanna Westerling, the Winter Widow that she is. On Patreon nowadays, you can gift subs to people. So it's the holiday season. You can buy a subscription to History of Westeros for your friend, give them access to our bonus content, like The Lioness, the Kraken, and the Seahorse, and Red Kraken 2, or Red Kraken 1, and all that. All our other bonus episodes, ad-free and all that. Maybe you get them a cool nickname. All that fun stuff. You can do that over at patreon.com/History of Westeros. A couple more items, and that'll be it for today. Some random A Song of Ice and Fire threads that I want to tie up here. As we said, Euron claims to have been there, and of course, Melisandre spent a lot of time there. So there's definitely some characters that have the association that we're looking for. Also, as I said, Marwyn and Mirri Maz Duur, but Mirri Maz Duur is dead, so that's a dead end with her. But the Sea Snake and possibly Alyssa Farman, those are characters that we want to talk about too. To be fair, these characters probably went to Asshai proper and not the Shadowlands, but hey, we just don't have that. I don't think we've seen anyone from the Shadowlands in Westeros or even the Free Cities. I think the base Dothrak is the closest we get. So let's talk about the Sea Snake. Let's get a little bit of fun from him and start that off with a quote.
On his second voyage, Ser Corlys sailed even farther east and became the first Westerosi ever to reach Asshai-by-the-Shadow, the bleak black city of the Shadowbinders at the edge of the world. There, he lost his love and half his crew, if the tales be true. And there as well, in Asshai's harbor, he glimpsed an old and much weathered ship that he would swear forevermore could only have been Sunchaser.
There's a lot in that one. His love and half his crew? Okay, I have questions. His love was on his voyage with him. That's interesting. Was this person a sailor? Was this someone met along the way or someone who went with him? Interesting. Very interesting. And what happened to half his crew? Half of them. That's a lot. I don't think he had a small crew because, he had a big ship and a lot of goals. He wanted to get as much loot as possible. That's got to involve having plenty of help. So half of them died. Of what? Of just drinking the water, eating the fish, getting lost in this. I can't find my way back to the port. The city's so vast, I got lost in it. There's a lot of possibilities, but yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting to think about that. Some of these would have been veterans of his that would have been on his first voyage and all through this long second one up until the point where they disappeared. So there would have been some people he cared about, people he had spent a lot of time with, people that had crossed half the world or all the world with him, in addition to having been on his previous voyage. So that's a big deal. And if we get a Sea Snake TV show, this is a whole ass season right here. They could do with that. I mean, that's a full season, I think. Not season 1, though. You can't start with this. But if the show gets far enough, assuming it even happens in the first place, well, this would be a big milestone. If we hope if this show happens, we get at least to this point where he goes to Asshai. That would be so cool. And of course, any showrunner making the show would of course, see that. They would look at all the things and be like, oh yeah, we got to do that. Sadly, because of the destruction of his treasures during the Dance of the Dragons, he wouldn't have any artifacts that he got in Asshai, unless maybe they were gifted first. He may have gotten some cool Asshai artifact and given it away to somebody, and that, by giving it to somebody, it would have avoided the destruction that happened to High Tide. Right? What about this last bit, though? He swore that he saw Sunchaser. That's Alyssa Farman's ship, of course. Now, let's look at the timeline real quick. We don't know for certain that she made it there, but this makes it sound like she did. It's an unmistakable ship, a very unique ship. That's why this claim is hard to reject. What's his angle? If he's lying, I mean, it makes him sound cool. But it's not like he profits from it. He's not going to make money from this. It doesn't have any obvious incentive to lie here other than it sounds cool. And him being such a skilled mariner, the fact that the ship is so unique, he would recognize it. That's the thing. Now, this would be when he went to Asshai. We don't know exactly, but it would be in the 80s AC. Something like 30 years after the Sunchaser left Old Town and headed west. So it fits. Like, that works. The timeline isn't too stretched there. She wouldn't be super ancient. And of course, he didn't actually see her. He doesn't claim to have seen her. He just did the ship. Now, you wonder, did he go looking for her? Maybe that's what happened to half the crew, or some of them. They went looking too, and in their misadventures trying to locate what happened to Alyssa Farman, perhaps to learn what she'd learned on her voyages. That's something Corlys would really want to know about. He would want to find her and swap stories. What a meeting of the minds that would be. What two people in the world would have more interesting things to talk about? Very few. That would be an incredible conversation. A fly on the wall would be a VIP box seat there for that. And again, if they ever do a TV show about this, I would guess very strongly that yes, he would find her, because it's the more exciting result than just, oh, she's not there. Damn, we found the ship, but not her. There's ways to write that would be more interesting. I'm just guessing it's probably easier to say, yes, they found an old Alyssa Farman. She's retired there for whatever reason. They invent a story about that. She doesn't want to go back. Maybe they can make a version of it where she's gone, and that's more interesting somehow. They find her writings. They find her journals. They find a daughter or son of hers. That would kind of get past the whole child thing. But this could be an adult, someone that's, grown up by now. Again, a lot of time has passed, 30 years. So, yeah, I mean, it would be hard to find her, but that could be part of the adventure. That could be part of what causes this to be a whole season's worth of material. Exploring Asshai with a purpose, trying to find this Westerosi person. And did she find a passage through the West? I mean, that's huge if Corlys could find that out. Now, he probably didn't find that in book canon, because if he had learned about the possibility of going west and confirmed that you could do that, he would have tried to do it himself. This was his second voyage going to Asshai. And remember, he did 9 voyages. That's one of the names that was being kicked around for the name of that show. So anyway, very possible, very possible. Okay, so that's the Sea Snake and Alyssa Farman, and that is basically our episode. We talked about Melisandre, we talked about Marwyn. We hope there's more from Quaithe. We hope that these characters give us more on Asshai, the Shadowlands. Safe to say there is more to come in that regard. Maybe not a lot, but definitely more. And that's without the possibility of TV shows, which, yeah, I mean, those would be new inventions that might not be from George. They might. Some of it might come from George, but who knows? Who knows when those shows will even get made, if they even get made. But it is a major possibility for the expansion of this corner of the world, these threads, these stories, and again, potential for new stories. Carl Snark says Odysseus loses almost all of his men as well. He told them not to touch those cows. Hey, good point. Yeah, it is sort of an Odyssey situation for him, except that he's, venturing out on purpose. He didn't really struggle to get home. But hey, that's a good connection. It's a good parallel like that. Even the werewoods are kind of wooden masks in a sense. Yeah, that's true. They are faces because the children and the green seers see through them. They really have that mask vibe because people can look through those eyes. Very good call. The trivia question I asked at the beginning of the episode was, which notable character on their way to meet Daenerys is seemingly not mentioned in Quaithe's prophecy? As always, the answer is in the episode. And the answer is Marwyn the Mage. Again, very interesting. Quaithe didn't mention him. He's on the way to Dany. What does that mean?
Good job to Chatty Lumpkin, who guessed it.
Good job, Chatty Lumpkin. Our next episode is the final installment of this year's Topics Moot. This was number 11, Nymeria Part 3, Nymeria in Dorne. We've covered Nymeria on her Odyssey in the 10,000 Ships episode, which was Part 2, and in Part 1 called Mother Rhoyne, which details the initial exit from the Rhoyne, the refugee people and fleeing to Sothorios and all that, which the details of that, like I said, are in Part 2. So this is a good time to re-listen to those two. You can find them in our feed or on our YouTube channel. Because Part 3 of her Conquest of Dorne, alongside Mors Martell, sending 6 kings in chains to the wall, golden fetters, not just regular chains because they're kings, and a lot of fun stuff there. It's a great story. Nymeria is a very interesting character. So, hope you join us for that. That'll be a scripted episode. We do those occasionally still. In this episode, we mentioned many other episodes that you could check out. You might be interested in staying immersed in the world of George R. R. Martin. If so, I recommend our Melisandre episode. That's the most recent of these. The Blood Magic episode. The Asshai-by-the-Shadow episode is a kind of an obvious one that you could look into. Even though it's a bit old, it still holds up today. There's not much we would change about it, if anything. The Great Empire of the Dawn episode, a companion to that one. Very, very deep dive into the possibilities of that ancient civilization, such that we know. The Sun Chaser episode, of course, I mentioned when we talked about the Sun Chaser just now, and the Sea Snake episode. Both of them have their own episodes. And if you want to know more about those journeys, well, we get into everything we know about them in those episodes, as well as our Valar Rereadus Dany chapters. You can get only the Dany chapters of our Valar Rereadus if you join us on Patreon. That's one of the perks, is you get the individual POVs all in one place rather than having to listen to each chapter. We put them all in one place so you can get all the Dany, all the Arya. Not all of them are combined yet, but we're going through them steadily over the months and weeks. And quite a few of them are available now, including Daenerys. So you can listen to only our Daenerys chapter analysis if you want by joining us on Patreon. And if you're already there, hey, go find that, listen to it, enjoy. And if you get any new ideas, let us know. We're always up for discussing theories and that kind of fun stuff. Thank you, everybody, for watching live, if you did, or catching the episode after it was edited and put up on a podcast platform. Either way, we appreciate you consuming History of Westeros. Thank you to Nina Krusling for her assistance. Check her out at Good Queen Alley with 1L.tumblr.com. Thanks to Joey Koval and Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval. I switched their last names. I hadn't done that in so long. I used to do that all the time by accident. It's been a while. Looks like Asshai threw me off, you know? To go forward, I must go back. For their excellent music in our episodes. The intro music was written by Joey Townsend, and Jesse Koval made a different version of it. We love that. Bran the Builder also did that. He made a video intro for us. So did Michael Klarfeld. So thanks to both of them. And we will see you all next time for more. You know what to do. Valar Rereadus.